Poor kid walked lost. Toddler home in the storm. He didn't know baby's dad runs biggest MC. Rain hit the town like it was angry at it, hard, sideways, relentless, turning the streetlights into trembling halos and the gutters into rivers. Mason Reed felt the storm in his bones long before he saw it. It wasn't just the weather, it was the way every porch light died at once, the way the night went too quiet for half a second, and then every dog in the trailer park started barking like they'd recognized a threat. He pulled his hoodie tighter and kept walking anyway, grocery bag cutting into his fingers, bread, a can of soup, and a pack of cheap cough drops for his mom. That was tonight's victory. Lightning split the sky. The thunder that followed shook the aluminum siding of the trailers. Somewhere down the road, a transformer popped and the darkness deepened. Mason took one more step and froze. A small shape stood in the middle of the road, right where the water pooled deepest. Bare legs, no shoes, a little jacket too thin for this kind of cold. The kid couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3. And he was alone. Mason's first thought was stupid and automatic. Where's your mom? Like moms didn't disappear, like people didn't vanish in towns like this. The toddler blinked up at him, face streaked with rain and something darker, mud maybe. His lower lip trembled. One small hand clutched a plastic toy motorcycle so tight his knuckles looked white. Another bolt of lightning lit the road, and Mason saw it clearly. The kid's cheeks were purpled by cold, his hair plastered to his forehead, and there was a thin red mark across his wrist like someone had grabbed him too hard. Mason dropped the grocery bag. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer like you would with a scared animal. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" The child didn't answer. He just stared, eyes huge, like he was trying to decide if Mason was safe. Wind shoved rain into Mason's face. Behind him, a loose sign banged against a pole. Clang, 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 steady as a warning. Mason crouched, forcing his voice to stay calm. "What's your name?" The toddler's mouth opened, but only a shaky sound came out. Then he lifted the toy motorcycle, as if it was his proof of who he was supposed to be, as if that little plastic bike was the only reason he'd made it this far. Mason's throat tightened. He glanced up and down the road. No headlights, no frantic parents, no neighbors running out with flashlights, just storm. "Where do you live?" Mason asked. The toddler lifted his arm and pointed into the darkness, down the road toward the highway, the direction everyone avoided when the weather got bad. The direction where the woods started and the old industrial lot sat empty like broken teeth. Mason swallowed. Okay, we'll find it." He stood, grabbed the grocery bag, and took the toddler's hand. The kid's fingers were ice. Mason didn't hesitate. He scooped the child up, tucked him against his chest, and turned his hoodie into a shield. The toddler made a small sound, half sob, half relief, and clung to him with surprising strength. Mason started walking. The storm fought him the whole way. Water rushed over the road, pulling at his shoes. Branches littered the pavement. In the distance, a siren wailed once and then cut out like someone had torn the town's voice away. Mason kept his eyes forward, but he felt it, that creeping sense that the night wasn't empty. A vehicle moved somewhere out there, not close enough to see clearly. Just a low engine note slipping through the rain, then fading. Mason adjusted the toddler on his hip. "It's okay," he muttered, more to himself than to the kid. "We're just going home." The toddler's tiny face pressed into Mason's shoulder. Then, as if the kid heard something Mason didn't, he twisted his head and looked back. Mason followed his gaze. A pair of headlights appeared far behind them, slow, deliberate, cutting through the rain. They weren't speeding like a frantic parent. They weren't weaving like a drunk. They were pacing. Mason's stomach dropped. He turned off the main road, stepping through a gap between 2 trailers and onto a muddy side path that led behind the park. Most people didn't know it existed unless they lived here. Mason did, because he'd spent half his life finding ways to get from one place to another without being noticed. The toddler whimpered. "I got you," Mason whispered. "I got you." He pushed deeper into the mud and darkness, using the storm as cover. He reached the back fence where the trailer park ended and the tree line began. Beyond it, a narrow service road ran parallel to the highway, Cracked asphalt, overgrown edges, and no lights. Mason climbed the fence carefully with the toddler in his arms, wincing as the wet metal bit his palm. He landed hard on the other side, nearly slipping, but he kept the kid upright. Then he paused, listening. The vehicle on the main road slowed, then stopped. Even through the storm, Mason could feel eyes in the dark. He started moving again, faster now. The service road curved, taking them away from the park, away from safety. But Mason couldn't go back, not with whoever that was sitting out there like a spider waiting for a fly to turn around. Ahead, a dim glow flickered between trees. Generator light, maybe. A place that wasn't completely dead. Mason headed toward it. As they walked, the toddler's breathing steadied, but his grip stayed tight. Every few steps, the kid would lift his head and stare into the darkness like he expected someone to leap out. Finally, Mason reached a small roadside building, an old diner with one window lit and a neon sign that barely buzzed. Open. The parking lot was half flooded, and the wind pushed sheets of rain across the cracked concrete. Mason's relief lasted exactly 1 second, because parked beside the diner, angled like it had arrived in a hurry, was a black SUV with its engine running. And on the dashboard, barely visible through the rain-streaked windshield, a blue light pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat. Mason stopped, the toddler heavy in his arms. The kid lifted his head, saw the SUV, and made a frightened sound that wasn't a cry. It was a warning. Mason's mouth went dry. He turned, scanning the lot. And that's when he saw the second vehicle, farther back near the trees, half hidden, lights off. Someone was waiting. Mason took one slow step backward, then another, trying not to splash, trying not to draw attention. The diner door opened. Warm light spilled out. A woman stepped onto the porch, squinting into the storm. She saw Mason. Then she saw what he was holding. Her face changed instantly. Shock, recognition, then fear so sharp it looked like pain. "Oh my God," she whispered, and her hand flew to her mouth. "Where did you—" Before she could finish, the SUV's driver's side door opened. A man got out, moving calm despite the weather. He wore a jacket that looked official even from here. He shut the door gently, like he wasn't in any rush at all. Then he raised his voice, loud enough to carry through the rain. "Hey," he called. "Kid, put the child down and step away." Mason's heart slammed against his ribs. He looked at the woman on the porch. Her eyes flicked to the toddler, then to the man by the SUV, like she knew exactly what was about to happen. And Mason understood something in a flash that made his blood turn cold. That man wasn't surprised to see the toddler. He'd been looking for him, and he didn't look relieved. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you are watching this from. Mason didn't answer the man in the official jacket. He couldn't. The words got stuck behind his teeth because the toddler had gone rigid in his arms, small body trembling like it recognized the voice, or the kind of danger that came with it. The woman on the diner porch took one step forward, then stopped like an invisible leash snapped her back. Her eyes were wide, pleading at Mason without moving her mouth. "Don't." The storm threw rain in hard sheets across the parking lot. The neon open sign fizzed and dimmed, then flared again. Somewhere behind the diner, the dark vehicle by the tree line stayed still, lights off like it was watching them breathe. The man by the SUV raised his hands in a calm gesture that didn't match his words. "Easy," he called. "We're trying to help. Put the kid down." Mason's pulse hammered in his throat. Helping people didn't start with commands. Helping people didn't come with an idling black SUV and a blue dash light hidden behind rain. Mason shifted his stance, backing toward the edge of the lot. His shoes sank into water that was already climbing over the curb. The man took 2 slow steps closer, blocking the only straight path to the road. "Son," he said, tone patient, almost practiced, "that child's been reported missing. You're making this worse." Mason stared at him, trying to read what kind of official he was. Not a full uniform, not a badge in plain sight, just a dark jacket, a radio clipped on the shoulder, and the posture of someone used to giving orders in rooms where other people listened. "I found him," Mason said, voice rough. "He was in the road." "Uh-huh." The man nodded like Mason had confirmed what he wanted. "And you decided to take him?" Mason tightened his grip when the toddler whimpered. I'm taking him home. The woman on the porch said too quickly, "He doesn't know." The man's head snapped toward her. She cut herself off instantly. Mason caught it, that tiny interaction, the way her courage died the second the man looked at her. The man turned back to Mason and smiled like he hadn't just silenced someone. "Home," he repeated. "Where's that?" Mason hesitated, and in that half second, he saw the mistake. The man's eyes sharpened, hungry. This wasn't a conversation, it was fishing. The toddler lifted his head again and stared past the man toward the far end of the lot. Mason followed the toddler's gaze. A shape stood under the diner's awning shadow, half hidden behind a support post. For a moment, Mason thought it was just a person taking shelter from the rain. Then, lightning hit, and the flash revealed a leather vest on the figure. A patch, curved at the top like a smile, stitched across the back. The words were too far to read, but the symbol at the center, an iron skull over crossed pistons, was unmistakable even in a split-second glimpse. The toddler made a sound, small but specific, and shoved his toy motorcycle toward that figure like it was a key. The figure didn't move, but Mason felt something shift in the air, like the storm wasn't the only thing that had pressure. The man by the SUV saw the toddler's movement too. His smile faltered, just for an instant, then came back harder. "Okay," he said, voice warmer now. "Let's do this the easy way. Bring him here. We'll get him back to his father." Mason's stomach dropped. His father. The woman on the porch flinched at that word like it was a name she didn't want spoken. Mason took another slow step back. The man's radio crackled softly, not loud enough to make out words, but enough to confirm there were others listening. "Listen," Mason said, trying to keep his tone steady. "If he's missing, call the police. I'll wait inside." The man's eyes narrowed. "I am the police," he said. He didn't sound proud. He sounded annoyed, like the lie was getting inconvenient. Mason's mouth went dry. He glanced at the SUV again. Blue light on the dash. No marked unit. No visible number plates from where he stood. And that other vehicle, still tucked into darkness. The toddler shifted in Mason's arms, pressing his face into Mason's shoulder again. The kid didn't cry now. He did something worse. He went quiet, the way kids go quiet when they've learned crying doesn't work. The woman on the porch whispered, "Please, just come inside." Her voice cracked. Mason made a decision, not a heroic one, not a smart one, just the only one that kept the toddler away from that man's hands. He turned and sprinted sideways along the flooded edge of the lot, aiming for the narrow gap between the diner and the line of trees behind it. Mud sucked at his feet. Water splashed up his jeans. Wind tried to shove him off balance. "Hey!" the man shouted, anger snapping through his calm. "Stop!" Mason didn't. Behind him, the SUV's engine revved. The toddler clung hard, tiny fingers fisted in Mason's hoodie. Mason hit the tree line and pushed through, branches slapping his face, thorns catching at fabric. The ground back there was uneven, a mess of old gravel and broken glass, and he nearly went down twice but caught himself, keeping the toddler's head tucked against his chest. Headlights burst through the rain as the SUV swung around the diner, searching. Mason dropped low behind a heap of rotting pallets and listened. The SUV slowed, tires cutting through standing water. The man's voice carried, muffled by the storm, but sharp with certainty. "He's behind the diner. He can't go far." Mason held his breath until his ribs hurt. Another sound layered in, an engine that wasn't the SUV. Deeper, throatier, more than one. Bikes. Mason's heart slammed so hard, it felt like it moved his whole body. He risked a glance through the slats of the pallets. Down the service road, ghosted by rain, 3 motorcycles rolled in with no headlights, just dim running lights like embers. They moved slow and controlled, not racing, not panicking, like they owned time. The riders wore leather vests, the same skull and piston symbol, now clear as daylight in the lightning. One bike stopped near the far edge of the lot. Another circled behind the diner. The third stayed near the trees, a shadow watching shadows. The man by the SUV stepped out again, turning toward them. His shoulders stiffened. He wasn't in control anymore. Mason's mind tried to catch up. The toddler, the patch, his father, the way the woman had flinched, the way the officer had looked irritated, not relieved. This wasn't a missing kid situation. This was territory. Mason shifted the toddler in his arms, trying to keep him quiet, and the kid's toy motorcycle squeaked, a tiny plastic protest that sounded too loud in the darkness. One of the riders snapped his head toward the pallets. Mason froze. The rider lifted a hand, pointing, not like a random guess, but like he'd been watching the back of that diner before Mason ever ran here. Mason's stomach turned to ice. The rider got off his bike and started walking toward the tree line. He was tall, broad, moving careful like he didn't want to slip. Lightning flashed again and Mason saw his face, hard angles, a scar at the edge of one eyebrow, eyes pale and focused. Not a kid, not a teenager, a man. The man in the police jacket called out, voice rising over the storm. "I've got him contained. We can do this clean." The biker didn't even look at him. He kept coming. Mason's breath came shallow. He scanned for exits. Behind him, deeper woods and old fencing. To his left, a drainage ditch swollen with floodwater. To his right, the diner's back wall and a service door. The biker was getting closer. The toddler stirred, lifting his head, and for the first time since Mason found him, the kid made a word-like sound, broken, wet, but clear enough to understand one syllable. "Da." Mason's throat tightened. The kid reached out a small hand toward the approaching biker, not in fear, in recognition. The biker stopped 5 feet away, rain dripping off his hair, his vest heavy and dark. His gaze fixed on the toddler's face, and for the first time, his expression shifted, something like shock, like disbelief, like he couldn't allow himself to feel relief yet. Then he looked at Mason. "You find him?" he asked. His voice was low, rough, controlled. Mason nodded once. He was alone, in the road. The biker's jaw tightened. He glanced past Mason toward the diner lot where the SUV idled and the man in the jacket hovered like he didn't know whether to fight or talk. "What's your name?" the biker asked. "Mason." The biker studied him like he was weighing a decision that could ruin someone's life. "You hurt him?" he asked, blunt. "No," Mason said immediately. "I carried him. That's it." The toddler lifted his toy motorcycle again toward the biker, offering it like a sacred object. The biker's eyes flicked to it, then back to Mason. "You run from that guy?" Mason hesitated, then nodded. The biker's mouth tightened into something that wasn't a smile, more like approval sharpened into warning. "Good," he said. Behind them, one of the other riders pulled up closer, stopping just short of the pallets. He stayed on the bike, scanning the trees, scanning the diner, scanning everything like he expected bullets to come from the rain. The biker in front of Mason reached into his vest pocket slowly, careful not to spook either Mason or the child, and pulled out a phone. The screen lit his face in harsh blue. He spoke into it without taking his eyes off Mason. "Road captain, I've got eyes on him. Kid's safe." A pause. Then his voice changed, just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "He's with a kid. Looks like he carried him. Doesn't look like he's lying." Another pause. Rain hammered down like fists on metal. The biker's gaze slid to the man by the SUV. His voice went colder. "And tell Prez, there's a unit out here that shouldn't be. Unmarked. Blue dash light. Same guy from last time." Mason's blood went colder at the words "tell Prez." The biker ended the call and took one step closer. "You did the right thing," he said to Mason, quiet enough that the storm almost swallowed it. "But you're standing in a bad place, holding the wrong kid." Mason swallowed hard. "Who is he?" The biker didn't answer directly. He tilted his head toward the toddler, who was now staring past Mason again. Mason turned his head. The man in the police jacket was walking closer through the rain, hands out, like he was trying to look non-threatening. But now he wasn't smiling. Now he looked desperate. "All right," the man called, voice tight. "Enough of this. Hand the child over. That's an order." The biker in front of Mason took a slow step sideways, placing his body between Mason and the man. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just stood there like a locked door. The man stopped, rain dripping off his hair, eyes flicking between the biker and the toddler. "You don't understand what you're interfering with," the man said. The biker's gaze didn't move. "Oh," he replied, calm as a knife. "I understand exactly." The other biker behind them clicked something metal, subtle, fast. Not a gun cocking loud for drama, just the quiet sound of a weapon being made ready. Mason's mouth went dry. The toddler tightened his grip on Mason's hoodie again, and Mason felt how small the kid really was, how easily someone could take him, how easily this whole night could become something Mason never crawled out of. The man in the jacket leaned forward, rain streaming off his jaw. "Last chance," he said, voice low now, meant only for them. "Give me the kid and you walk away. Keep playing hero and—" A new set of headlights appeared at the edge of the lot, brighter than the rest, cutting through the storm like the night was being split open. And behind those lights, engines, many of them, began to roll in, deep and steady, like thunder you couldn't outrun. The new headlights didn't drift in like normal traffic. They came in a line, spaced and steady, bright enough to bleach the rain white. Engines rolled with them, heavy, synchronized, deliberate, until the whole flooded lot vibrated under Mason's feet. The man in the police jacket took one step back without meaning to. He caught himself, straightened, and forced his face into a hard mask. The biker shielding Mason didn't move. He just angled his shoulders slightly, as if bracing for a wind that wasn't coming from the sky. The first bike in the line cut its lights at the edge of the lot and coasted forward on a low growl. Then another. Then another. Leather vests, patches, faces half hidden by rain and shadow. Some wore helmets, some didn't. None looked surprised to be here. Mason's hands went numb around the toddler, not from cold now, from the realization that he'd walked into a world that didn't ask permission from anyone. A truck rolled in behind the bikes, lifted suspension, black paint swallowing the light. It stopped near the diner porch. The engine didn't shut off right away, like even the vehicle understood it might need to move fast. The diner door cracked open again, and the woman stepped out halfway, clutching the frame like she was holding herself upright. She kept her gaze on the toddler, not on the officer, not on the bikers, only on the kid, like she couldn't afford to look at anything else. The officer turned his head slowly, scanning the arrivals, and Mason saw the fear he was trying to hide. Not panic, something more calculating, like he was doing math in his head and not liking the answer. The road captain's phone buzzed again. He checked it, then slid it away without speaking. A rider near the front peeled off and walked toward them. He didn't hurry. The rain could have been applause for how little he cared about it. When lightning flashed, Mason saw him clearly. Late 30s, maybe early 40s, thick neck, heavy shoulders, beard trimmed close, a dark hoodie under his vest. His eyes were the kind that didn't waste time on hope. They landed on Mason first, then on the toddler, and something tightened in his face, something he forced back down so fast Mason almost missed it. He stopped a few feet away. "Which one of you called it in?" he asked, voice flat. The road captain nodded once. "Me." The older man's gaze flicked to the officer. "And who's that?" The officer stepped forward fast, too eager, like speaking first might save him. "Deputy? Name," the older man cut in. The officer hesitated half a beat. "Deputy Harlan." The older man didn't react like that meant anything good. Then he looked at Mason. "Kid," he said, "set him down." Mason's arms tightened. The road captain spoke for the first time with a warning edge. "He ain't letting go because of what your boy did. Found him out in the street, ran from Harlan." The older man's eyes narrowed. "Ran from law?" he asked Mason. Mason swallowed, then forced himself to speak. He didn't look like law. He wasn't acting like it. A muscle jumped in Harlan's jaw. "He's lying. I told him to stop. He bolted. That's suspicious." The older man ignored Harlan like he was background noise. He stepped closer to Mason, stopping just outside arm's reach. "Look at me," he said. Mason did. The older man's eyes dropped to the toddler's wrist, the red mark, then to the kid's bare feet. His mouth pressed into a thin line. "What's your name?" he asked Mason. "Mason." "What'd you do with him?" "I carried him," Mason said. "That's it. He was in the road, alone." The older man stared at him for a long second that felt like being weighed on a scale Mason couldn't see. Then he shifted his gaze to the toddler. The kid stared back, lip trembling again. Not because of Mason now, but because the crowd, the engines, the rain, the adult voices were too much. The toddler lifted the toy motorcycle, holding it out toward the older man the same way he had with the road captain. The older man's expression cracked, just barely. He didn't smile. He didn't soften. But his eyes changed, like a door inside him opened a fraction. He reached out slowly and touched the toy's handlebars with 2 fingers. Like he was confirming it was real, like he was grounding himself. Then he exhaled through his nose and said one quiet word that made the air shift. Atlas. The toddler made a small sound in response, almost a laugh, almost a sob, and leaned forward as if pulled by gravity. Mason's stomach dropped again. That wasn't a random kid. That was a kid with a name people used like it mattered. The older man looked back at Mason. You didn't take him from anywhere? No, Mason said. I found him. Harlan tried again, forcing authority into his voice. This is a police matter. The child needs to be placed with proper... The older man turned his head toward Harlan, slow and deadly calm. You don't get to speak over me, he said. Harlan's eyes flashed. Excuse me? The older man stepped toward him, and it was like a line got drawn in the mud. 2 of the bikers behind him shifted their stance, hands low, ready. I said, the older man repeated, voice quieter now. You don't get to speak over me. Harlan held his ground, but his throat worked like he wanted to swallow his fear back down. I have jurisdiction here, Harlan said. You're obstructing an investigation. The older man tilted his head slightly, studying him. You running dash cam on that unmarked SUV? Harlan's face tightened. It's an authorized vehicle. You got a unit number? Harlan didn't answer fast enough. The older man's eyes slid to the blue pulse on the SUV dashboard, then back to Harlan. You got a warrant? A report? Anything that explains why you're out here with lights hidden and backup parked in the trees? Mason's chest went tight at the reminder of that second vehicle. He hadn't imagined it. Harlan's voice rose, trying to outrun the question. The child is missing, and this boy... The older man's hand shot out and grabbed Harlan's jacket front, yanking him forward hard enough that Harlan stumbled. Gasps came from the diner porch. A couple of bikers moved in close without being told. Mason froze, Toddler clinging to him. The older man held Harlan up by his collar like he weighed nothing. You don't get to use my kid as a story, he said, low and brutal. Not with me standing right here. Harlan's face flushed. Your kid? The older man's grip tightened. Yeah, he said. Mine. The word hit Mason like a punch, not because it was surprising now, but because it made everything click into place. The patch, the riders, the way the storm didn't scare them. The biggest club in the region didn't just have a missing kid. Their president's kid had been out in the road in a storm, alone, and someone had been waiting at the diner like a trap was already set. The older man released Harlan with a shove. Harlan staggered back, catching himself. His hand twitched toward his belt, reflex, habit, threat. The road captain's voice cut through the rain like a razor. Don't. Harlan froze. A biker near the tree line stepped forward enough for Mason to see the outline of something in his hand. Not raised, just present. A reminder. The older man turned back to Mason. Bring him. Mason hesitated, then took a careful step forward. The older man didn't reach for Atlas immediately. He looked at Mason again, studying his face like he was searching for something hidden. You got parents? He asked. My mom, Mason said. She's sick. The older man nodded once as if filing that away. You live in that park? Yeah. You weren't looking for trouble tonight? No. Trouble found you anyway, the older man said. He finally reached out and took Atlas from Mason with controlled gentleness that didn't match the violence he'd just shown Harlan. Atlas grabbed the older man's hoodie and buried his face against his chest, breathing fast, then slower again, like his body finally believed he'd survived the night. The older man held him like it was the only real thing in the world. Then he lifted his gaze to Mason again. You did good, he said, and it sounded like it cost him something to admit it. But you're not walking away yet. Mason's stomach sank. What? The older man's eyes slid to Harlan. Because somebody let my kid get out, he said, voice steady now. And somebody tried to collect him like a package. Mason looked at Harlan. Harlan stared back, face tight, eyes hard, pretending he wasn't shaking inside. The diner woman stepped off the porch finally, moving fast through the rain like she couldn't stand it anymore. She came toward them, hands out, eyes on Atlas. Thank God, she whispered. Thank God he's alive. The older man's gaze sharpened on her. You work here? Yes, she said quickly. My name's Tessa. I was going to call, but the power. You recognized him, the older man said, not a question. Tessa's throat bobbed. Everybody knows. I mean, people know who you are. And you knew he was missing? Her eyes darted toward Harlan, then away. I heard it. It was going around. The older man held Atlas tighter. Who told you? Tessa swallowed. A man came in earlier, before the blackout. He asked questions about the back roads, about the trailer park, about whether the phones worked. He said he was looking for a lost child. Mason's skin crawled. Harlan's eyes narrowed. That's irrelevant. The older man glanced at Harlan like he'd swat a fly. Tessa went on, voice shaking. He paid cash. He left, then the storm got worse. Then she looked at Mason. Then you came with him, and I thought it was over. The older man's expression went cold. What did the man look like? Tessa hesitated. Big. Tattoos on his hands. He had a ring, like a skull, but not yours. Different. A rival symbol. Mason didn't know the clubs, but he knew enough about men to understand what it meant when someone had a skull ring and wanted you to notice. The road captain stepped in. That's not ours. The older man nodded slowly. No. It ain't. Harlan forced a laugh that sounded like metal scraping. You're letting rumors and scared waitresses. The older man turned on him so fast it made Mason flinch. You were here too early, he said to Harlan. That's what's bothering me. Harlan's eyes flashed. I responded. To what? The older man asked. Power's out. Phones are down. You just happened to be sitting in this lot with an unmarked unit and a blue light pulsing like you're fishing in the dark. Harlan's mouth opened, then shut. The older man looked at the road captain. Check the trees. I want eyes on that second vehicle. Quiet. The road captain nodded and motioned 2 riders off. They moved into the storm without headlights, disappearing like smoke. The older man shifted Atlas on his hip and looked at Mason again. You, he said. You're coming inside. Mason blinked. What? Because you saw him first, the older man said. You might be the only honest piece of this night. Mason's throat went tight. I just want to go home. The older man's gaze didn't soften. Home's not safe if this ain't done right, Tessa whispered. Please just listen to him. Mason looked at Atlas, asleep now against the older man's chest like the storm finally couldn't reach him. Mason's voice came out rough. I didn't do anything. I know, the older man said. That's why you're useful. The word useful made Mason's skin crawl, but he didn't see another option. The bikes, the SUV. The way Harlan's eyes kept calculating. They moved toward the diner together, Mason walking beside the older man, the road captain behind them, riders fanning out like a wall. Harlan stayed near his SUV, jaw clenched, watching like he was memorizing faces. Inside the diner, the air was warm and smelled like coffee that had been burnt hours ago. A generator hummed somewhere back in the kitchen. A few locals sat in booths, frozen mid-sip, staring like they'd just watched the world change. The older man carried Atlas to the far booth, sat, and kept the child against him. He pointed across the table at Mason. Sit. Mason sat, hands still shaking. The older man leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Mason's. Start from the beginning, he said. Every detail, where you found him, who you saw, which way you ran, and why. Mason opened his mouth, and from outside, through the storm and the diner's thin walls, a muffled thud sounded. Then another. Not thunder, something heavier. The door swung open, letting a sheet of rain blow in. One of the riders stepped inside, soaked, breathing hard. We found the second car, he said. The older man didn't blink. And? The rider's gaze flicked to Mason, then back to the older man. It's empty, he said. Still warm. The diner went silent in a way Mason could feel in his teeth. Still warm meant the driver hadn't gone far. Mason's mind snapped back to the flooded lot, the hidden vehicle by the trees, the sensation of being watched before he ever saw headlights. Whoever had been in that car hadn't just been waiting. They'd been close enough to move the moment things shifted. The older man, Prez, kept Atlas tucked against him, one arm around the toddler's back like a seatbelt made of muscle. Atlas slept, mouth slightly open, exhausted the way kids get when fear finally loses its grip. But even asleep, his fingers held the toy motorcycle tight. Prez didn't look at the rider who delivered the news. He looked at Mason. "You said you ran behind the diner," he said. "Service road. Pallets." Mason nodded, swallowing. "Yeah. You see anyone in the trees?" "No, just the car. I saw lights off. I felt—" Mason hated how it sounded, but he forced it out. "I felt someone there." Prez's eyes narrowed slightly, not disbelief, recognition. Tessa hovered near the counter, wringing her hands. A couple of locals in the booths stared like they were watching a movie they couldn't leave. The generator's hum in the back suddenly seemed loud, like a mechanical heartbeat. Road Captain took 2 steps inside, rain dripping from his vest onto the tile. He didn't sit. He didn't relax. His gaze kept cutting to windows, to the door, to the dark corners. "How many?" Prez asked him. "Outside," Road Captain said. "7 with us. 2 went to the trees. 2 are watching the front. We can pull more if you want." Prez nodded once, then his voice went low. "Lock it down." Road Captain pointed at 2 riders near the door. "Back door, now." They moved, boots squeaking on wet tile, and disappeared into the kitchen. A moment later, Mason heard a metallic clack, bolt thrown, chain engaged. Prez's attention returned to Mason, sharp and unwavering. "Tell me exactly what Harlan said to you," he ordered. Mason's throat tightened. "He told me to put the child down and step away. He said it was an order, that the kid was reported missing." Prez's jaw flexed once. "And before that?" "He was already there," Mason said. "The SUV was waiting. He didn't look surprised. He looked like he expected us to show up." Across the diner, Harlan stood near the front window, half in shadow, pretending he was outside the circle while still listening to everything. Rain ran down the glass behind him, making him look warped and distant. He wasn't cuffed. Nobody had touched him since the collar grab, but he had 2 bikers near him who weren't pretending. Harlan's voice cut in, forced calm. "This is illegal. You're detaining an officer." Prez didn't even glance at him. He spoke to Road Captain. "Bring him here." Harlan's posture stiffened. He tried to step back, but one biker's hand touched his shoulder, barely any pressure, and Harlan stopped like he'd hit a wall. "I'm not going anywhere," Harlan snapped. Road Captain's voice stayed flat. "You are." The 2 bikers guided him, not dragging, not brutal, just unavoidable. Harlan's boots scraped the floor as he fought to keep dignity while losing position. They set him in the open space between booths like a piece on a board. Prez finally looked at him. The stare lasted too long. Mason watched Harlan's eyes flicker, trying to find an angle, an ally, a way to turn the room back into his kind of room. Prez spoke softly. "Who called you?" Harlan let out a short laugh. "You think I need a call to respond to a missing kid?" Prez's gaze stayed steady. Phones were down. Harlan's smile tightened. "Radio still works." Prez nodded like he accepted the possibility. Then he asked, "Who on the radio?" Harlan's face hardened. "Dispatch?" Prez leaned forward slightly. "Name?" Harlan's mouth opened, then shut. That half-second was enough. Road Captain shifted his weight, like he could smell the lie turning sour. Tessa's voice came out thin. He was here too fast. Harlan snapped his head toward her. "Shut up!" The room moved at once. One biker's chair scraped back. Another took 1 step forward. The air tightened like someone had pulled a cord. Prez didn't raise his voice. "You don't tell her to shut up." Harlan held Prez's gaze, then forced his eyes away. He tried to breathe like he wasn't outnumbered. Prez pointed at Mason without looking away from Harlan. "Kid says you weren't relieved," Harlan scoffed. "That's subjective." Prez's mouth didn't change, but something in his eyes did. "You got an unmarked SUV with a dash light. You got a second car, warm, empty, parked in my woods. And you got mouthy when my people showed up." Harlan's voice sharpened. "Your people. That's the problem right there." Prez nodded once, slow. "That's the truth right there." He shifted Atlas slightly, adjusting the toddler's head so it rested safer on his shoulder. Then he turned his head toward Road Captain. "Call Gray," Prez said. Road Captain pulled out his phone. Harlan's eyes widened a fraction. "You can't," Prez cut him off. "I can." Road Captain stepped away, murmured into the phone. Mason couldn't hear the words, only the tone, short, clipped, urgent. Prez looked back to Mason. "You said Atlas had a mark on his wrist." Mason nodded, like someone grabbed him. Prez's hand tightened on Atlas's back, controlled fury barely contained. And he was barefoot. Yeah. Prez stared at the sleeping child for a moment, like he was forcing himself not to imagine what could have happened if Mason hadn't been walking that road. Then he lifted his eyes to Tessa again. That man you saw earlier. Tattoos on hands, skull ring. What else? Tessa swallowed hard. He had a limp right leg, and he kept checking his phone like he was waiting for a message. Prez's gaze flicked to Harlan. You know him. Harlan's jaw worked. A lot of people have tattoos. Prez leaned in a little closer, voice lower. A lot of people don't come sniffing around my town asking about back roads. Harlan's nostrils flared. He looked at Mason like Mason was the weak link, the easiest to twist. You want to go home, kid? Tell them you took that child from somewhere. Tell them you were paid. Mason stared at him, stunned by how fast he tried to poison the room. I wasn't paid, Mason said. I found him, in the road. Harlan's eyes went colder. Sure you did. Prez's hand moved, quick, precise. He reached across the table and grabbed Harlan's chin with 2 fingers, forcing his face up. The diner held its breath. Prez didn't squeeze hard. He didn't need to. The control was the threat. Try that again, Prez said quietly, and you'll be missing too. Harlan swallowed, and for the first time his bravado cracked all the way to the bone. He blinked fast, then pulled himself together. Prez released him like he was nothing. Road captain returned from the side, phone still in hand. Gray's on his way. 10 minutes. Prez nodded, then looked toward the windows. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the lot outside. Water flowed like a shallow river over the asphalt. Bikes stood in a loose perimeter, riders still mounted, some facing outward as if expecting company. Mason realized something and felt his stomach drop. You said, my home isn't safe, Mason murmured. Prez's eyes slid to him. If you were a trap kid, they'd want you too, because you brought Atlas back. Mason's throat tightened. I don't have anything. That don't matter, road captain said. They'll use what you are, poor, alone, easy to blame. Mason's hands clenched under the table. I have my mom. Prez's gaze sharpened. Your mom's at your place right now? Yes. Prez's voice stayed calm, but it hit like a hammer. Then we check on her. Mason's chest tightened with panic. What do you mean, check? Prez stood, Atlas still asleep against him. The room shifted with him like gravity changed. Riders outside turned their heads. Even Harlan straightened, attention snapping into focus. Prez's voice cut through the diner. I want 2 bikes to the trailer park, quiet. No lights, I want eyes on that kid's home. Mason shot to his feet. No, please, my mom. Prez looked at him, and for the first time there was something almost human in it, an understanding of fear that wasn't weakness. That's why we go, Prez said, because if they wanted Atlas, they might have tagged you as the delivery. Mason's mouth went dry. I know, Prez said. They don't care. Road captain pointed at 2 riders near the door. You and you, move. They were gone in seconds, slipping out into the storm like shadows. Harlan laughed under his breath, trying to claw back control with sarcasm. So now you're running patrols. That's cute. Prez turned toward him slowly. You're coming too. Harlan jerked. What? Prez's voice was flat. You wanted the kid. You wanted Mason. You're going to watch what happens when we check his house. Harlan's face tightened. I'm not leaving this diner. Road captain stepped close, leaning in just enough. You are. Harlan looked around for someone to save him. Nobody did. Prez shifted Atlas to road captain without ceremony. Road captain took the toddler carefully, cradling him with an awkward gentleness that didn't fit his size. Prez reached into his pocket, pulled out a small key fob, and tossed it to a rider. Truck. Then he looked at Mason. You ride? Mason blinked. No. You ride tonight, Prez said. Mason's stomach twisted. I can't. You can, road captain said. Or you can stay here and pray your mom's breathing when you get back. Mason felt his knees go weak at that. He nodded once, barely. Outside, the storm slapped his face like punishment the moment the door opened. Rain soaked him instantly. The lot was a mirror of black water and broken light. Prez walked ahead, not running, not rushing, just moving like the storm belonged to him. Mason followed, trying not to slip. A biker fell in behind him, close enough that Mason could feel him without looking. They reached a motorcycle, big, black, idling low. The rider swung off and nodded toward the back seat. "Get on," the rider said. Mason hesitated. "I've never—" The rider grabbed Mason's elbow and guided him like you'd guide a kid onto a horse. "Hold the grab bar. Wrap your legs. Don't panic." Mason climbed on, hands shaking, rain blurring everything. Prez climbed into the truck, driver's side, engine already rumbling. He glanced over once, eyes hard. "Stay behind me," he said. The convoy moved. Bikes rolled first, lights low. The truck followed. Water kicked up from tires. The town's dead streetlights made everything feel like it was happening in a dream where the rules had been shut off. As they approached the trailer park, Mason's heart started pounding so hard he felt sick. The road into the park was half flooded and branches hung low like claws. Mason saw his row, saw his trailer, and his stomach dropped through the pavement because the front door wasn't shut. It was open, just a crack, like someone had left in a hurry. The bike slowed. Mason's voice came out raw. That door was closed. Prez's truck rolled to a stop behind the bikes. The engine stayed on. The windshield wipers thumped like a countdown. Two riders dismounted and moved toward the trailer, silent, fast, spreading out, one to the side window, one to the back. Mason tried to get off the bike, but the rider behind him gripped his shoulder. "Stay," he warned. Mason's chest burned. "That's my mom." The rider's grip tightened. "Stay alive." Prez got out of the truck, rain soaking him instantly, and walked toward the trailer. He didn't carry a flashlight. He didn't need one. His presence alone made the darkness feel smaller. He reached the steps, paused. Then he lifted one hand and pushed the door open. It swung wide. Warm air spilled out, too warm for a broken-down trailer in a blackout. And inside, from the darkness, a voice said softly, like it had been waiting for Mason specifically, "About time." The voice came from inside Mason's trailer, like it had always lived there. Soft, confident, not shouted over the storm, spoken like the storm was irrelevant. Mason's breath caught. Every muscle in his body tried to launch him off the bike. "Stay," the rider behind him warned again, grip iron on Mason's shoulder. Mason couldn't, not with his mother in there, not with the door open and that voice waiting like a spider in a web. Prez stepped into the doorway without hesitation, shoulders filling the frame. Rainwater rolled off him and onto the warped porch boards. From where Mason sat, he couldn't see inside, only darkness and a faint warm glow like a lamp had been lit somewhere in the back, warmth in a blackout. Mason's stomach turned. Prez didn't raise his voice. "Step out," he said. A pause, then the voice again, amused. "Nah. I'm good right here." The rider at Mason's side, one of the two who'd flanked the windows, shifted, taking a position angled toward the back of the trailer. The other biker by the side window leaned closer, listening. Mason's throat burned. "Mom," he tried to call, but the word came out broken. No answer. Inside, the voice chuckled, and Mason hated how familiar it sounded now, like he'd heard it before in some cheap store, some gas station, some place where men like that always pretended they were harmless. "You the kid?" the voice asked casually. "Mason?" Mason went cold. He didn't answer. Prez's head tilted slightly, as if he'd heard the name, too. He glanced back once, eyes cutting to Mason. The stranger inside continued, calm as a man sitting in his own living room. "I told you we'd meet, didn't I?" Mason's mind flashed, too fast, too sharp, back to the diner. Tessa's description, tattoos on hands, skull ring, limp, checking his phone like waiting for a message. He was asking about the trailer park. He'd been building a route, a timing, and the storm was the cover. Prez took one step deeper into the doorway. His silhouette swallowed what little light existed inside. "Last warning," Prez said. "Step out." "Or what?" the voice replied. Prez didn't answer. Silence was his threat. Then the voice changed, still soft but now edged with something sharper. "I don't think you want to do that," it said. "Not with your kid asleep back at your little diner." Mason's blood stopped. The rider behind Mason swore under his breath, low and vicious. Prez didn't flinch, but something in his shoulders tightened, like a wire pulled too far. "You don't have my kid," Prez said. The voice laughed gently. "I don't need to have him. I just need you thinking I do." Mason's hands clenched the grab bar so hard his knuckles ached. He realized sickly what this was: a distraction, a split, a pressure point. Someone inside was stalling Prez here while something else moved elsewhere. Prez spoke, controlled. "Who are you?" The voice sighed like it was bored. "Come on, you know my work." A shape shifted inside the trailer, closer to the doorway now. Mason caught a glimpse, just a shadow moving past the warm light. Then a hand appeared in the doorway, tattooed across the knuckles, a heavy skull ring catching the faint glow. The hand held something else too, small, metallic, and wrong. Not a gun. A phone. The stranger lifted it, screen facing Prez. On the screen, a camera view played, grainy, dark, rain-streaked. Mason's heart jumped into his throat. It was the diner. The camera angle was from outside, near the back, looking in through a window. Mason could see Road Captain at the far booth, and Atlas, small body asleep against Road Captain's chest. Mason felt the world tilt. No, Road Captain had no idea he was being watched. None of them did. The stranger's voice turned silky. "You walked away from him," he murmured. "That's a bad habit for a father." Prez's eyes went flat. "If you can see him, you're close," the stranger hummed. "Smart." Then, from somewhere deeper inside the trailer, came a muffled sound, a small groan, weak, familiar. Mason's chest exploded. "Mom!" he shouted, and the biker behind him finally let go because Mason tore free. Mason hit the mud, slipped, caught himself, and sprinted toward the steps. Two bikers moved to intercept him, but Prez threw one hand out without looking. "Stop," and they froze. Mason reached the porch and looked past Prez into the trailer. The warm glow came from a lantern on the kitchen counter, turned low. Shadows filled the corners, and on the floor near the couch, Mason's mother lay on her side, wrists tied with duct tape, mouth taped, eyes half open and glassy with pain. She was alive. Barely. Mason tried to step inside. Prez's arm shot out, blocking him like a steel bar. "Don't," Prez said, not unkind, final. "He wants you in here." Mason's eyes burned. "That's my mom!" The stranger inside shifted again, just out of clear view. His tattooed hand waved the phone lightly like it was nothing. "Kid's got spirit," he said. "I like that. Reminds me of the old days when people still fought for their own." Prez's voice stayed calm. "What do you want?" The stranger laughed. "What do I want? I want you to bleed for thinking you own this town." Prez didn't move. "Name your price." The stranger's amusement faded for the first time. "It ain't money." He took one slow step into the doorway light, enough for Mason to see him properly. Big, broad, wet hair plastered back, a limp in his right leg, subtle but real. Tattoos crawling up his hands and wrists. His eyes were bright with a kind of joy that didn't belong in human beings. He looked at Mason like Mason was a tool he'd already picked up. Then he looked at Prez. "I want you to choose," he said softly. Prez's gaze didn't flicker. "Choose what?" The stranger lifted the phone again, tilting it so the diner footage stayed visible. "You got your son," he said, "and you got this kid's mom, and you got this kid." His eyes slid to Mason, hungry. "Now," the stranger whispered, "I want to see if you're the kind of man who saves his blood, or the kind who saves his reputation." Mason's mind raced. He couldn't process it, couldn't understand how this was real. Prez spoke once, low. "You're not leaving here." The stranger smiled. "I'm already gone." And then, like he'd timed it with the storm, a loud crack sounded from the far side of the trailer, glass shattering. A biker outside shouted, "Back window!" Prez's head snapped toward the sound. The stranger moved, fast. He shoved the door wider with his shoulder, threw something small at the porch. Mason didn't even see what it was. Then, a harsh, blinding white burst filled the doorway. Mason's eyes flooded with light and pain. His ears rang like a bell had been hit inside his skull. He stumbled back, half blind. Shouts erupted. Boots hammered mud. Engines roared to life in the distance. Through the ringing, Mason heard Prez's voice, hard, furious, unmistakably afraid for the first time. "Atlas, call in, now!" Mason blinked tears and rain away, trying to see. The doorway was chaos. The lantern inside toppled, spilling light across the floor. Mason's mother wriggled weakly, taped mouth trying to scream. A biker sprinted around the side of the trailer toward the back. Another ran past Mason into the rain. Prez stepped into the trailer, moving straight to Mason's mother. He ripped the duct tape off her mouth in one savage pull. She gasped, sobbing. "Mason," she choked. He said they'd take you." Mason's blood ran cold. "Who?" Prez's voice was tight. "Not one man." Outside, a motorcycle engine screamed, high RPM tearing away fast. Another sound followed it, a truck door slamming, tires spinning in mud. Mason staggered to the porch edge, trying to see through the rain. Headlights flashed between trailers. A vehicle was moving through the park, fast. And for 1 second, Mason saw the silhouette of a man on a bike, hunched forward, riding hard, while something small hung from his left side like a sack. Mason's heart stopped. Not Atlas, smaller. A woman. No, wait, it wasn't a woman. It was Tessa, hair whipping, hands bound, mouth covered, being dragged against the rider's side as he sped through the flooded lane. Mason's stomach dropped into nothing, because Tessa had been the only witness who could describe him, and now the storm swallowed them whole. The biker behind Mason grabbed his hoodie and yanked him back off the porch before Mason could launch himself into the flood. "Let go!" Mason screamed, fighting like it mattered. "It does matter," the biker snapped back, voice low and lethal. "Not like that." Prez was already moving, half inside the trailer, half outside, one hand ripping at knots, the other barking orders into the storm. "Road captain," he shouted. "We got a snatch! South lane through the park! Go!" Road captain's voice answered from somewhere near the bikes. "On it!" Engines erupted. Mason twisted, trying to see. Headlights swept between trailers, bouncing off sheets of rain. A bike tore through the lane, water spraying like a wake, following the path where the kidnapper had vanished. Tessa's scream didn't carry. The storm ate everything. Inside, Mason's mom wheezed, eyes wild, voice rasping. "Mason, listen." He came in calm, like he knew where everything was. He said you brought the baby back." Prez's head snapped toward her. "Did he touch a phone? Any calls? Any names?" She coughed, shook her head weakly. He kept checking his screen, like he was waiting for a signal. A signal. The diner footage, the timing, the flashbang. Mason's chest heaved. Why did he take Tessa? Prez's gaze cut to him, hard, because she saw him and because he needs us blind. A rider ran up to the porch, rain streaming off his face. Back windows busted. He went out that way. Prez nodded once. He planned it. Mason tried to step forward again, but the biker behind him stayed close, keeping Mason from turning into a liability. Then the radio on the biker's shoulder crackled, loud enough to punch through rain. "Road captain, he's not alone," a voice said. "2 bikes, one's running escort." Prez's jaw tightened. "Rival crew?" "Don't know yet. No lights, moving clean." Mason's blood went cold at the word escort. That meant this wasn't a lone predator. It was a team. And then, another crackle, another voice sharper. "Prez, you're not going to like this. Harlan's SUV, gone." Prez turned his head slowly, eyes narrowing. "What?" "Unmarked unit left the lot, took off right after the flashbang. He's running." Silence hit hard. Mason's mind tried to stitch it together. Harlan at the diner, pretending to be Law, trying to take Atlas. Now the kidnapper hits Mason's trailer and snatches the witness, and Harlan disappears like smoke. Prez's eyes flicked toward the lane, then toward Mason, and for the first time, Mason saw something in him that wasn't just fury. Calculation. A man rearranging the board mid-game. "This is coordinated," Prez said. Mason's voice cracked. "So Harlan's with him." Prez didn't answer like it was a theory. He answered like it was a fact. "Yeah." Mason's mom grabbed Mason's sleeve with taped wrists, fingers weak. "Mason, don't go. Please." Mason swallowed, eyes burning. "I have to," Prez cut in, voice flat. "You're not going." Mason jerked his head toward him. "They took her because of me." "They took her because she can identify him," Prez said. "They'll take you next because you can identify Harlan. That's what this is. Cleaning up the night." Mason's breath came fast. "Then let me help. Please." Prez stared at him for a long second, then looked away toward the road like the decision irritated him. "Get his mom secured," Prez barked to 2 riders. "Bring her to the truck, now." They moved into the trailer carefully, lifting Mason's mom with surprising gentleness. She cried out once, not from pain, from fear, then clung to Mason with her eyes as they carried her out. Mason's hands clenched uselessly. A bike rolled up hard into the lane, tires cutting through water. The rider leaned low to Prez. "Captain says they're heading toward the old river lot," the rider said. "Same direction as the industrial yards. They're moving fast." Prez's head turned to the highway direction, the one Atlas had pointed toward earlier, the one Mason had felt like a mistake the moment he started walking that night. Prez exhaled slowly through his nose. "They're hurting us," he said. Mason's throat tightened. "To what?" Prez's eyes stayed on the dark road. "To a place where they can control angles, control exits, control the story." A thunderclap cracked overhead. The power lines hummed and swayed like they were alive. Road captain's voice crackled again through someone's radio, urgent now. "Prez! They just threw a roadblock up, down tree across County 6. They knew our route." Prez's jaw flexed. "Of course they did." Mason stared at him. "How could they know?" Prez finally looked at Mason again. "Because somebody's hearing everything we're doing." Mason's skin prickled. "A tracker?" Prez's gaze cut toward the truck, then toward the diner direction, then toward the lot, like he was scanning for an invisible thread. "Or," Prez said quietly, "because a deputy with a radio is feeding them." Mason's stomach turned. Then a biker jogged up from the far end of the lane, holding something in his hand. "Found this by the porch," he said. He handed it to Prez. It was small, black, wet, a button-sized device with adhesive backing. Prez's eyes narrowed. Mason leaned closer, dread pooling. "What is that?" Prez turned it between his fingers, rain glistening on plastic. "A bug," he said. Mason's mouth went dry. "From the trailer." Prez shook his head once. "From us. He threw it. Flashbang as cover, bug as gift." Road captain's voice came through again, louder, clipped. "We're losing them, Prez. They're cutting through the yards. If we don't move now..." Prez looked at Mason, then at Mason's mother being loaded into the truck, then down the dark lane where Tessa had vanished. He made a choice. "Kill all comms," Prez ordered. "No radios, no phones." Riders immediately began pulling devices off, tossing them into the truck bed like they were contaminated. Prez held the bug up for one of the bikers. "Crush it." The biker crushed it in his fist. Plastic snapped. Prez turned to Mason, eyes hard. "You still want to help?" he asked. Mason didn't hesitate. "Yes." Prez nodded once. "Then you do exactly what I say, and you don't act brave." Mason's voice came out raw. "I won't." Prez stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Mason could hear. "We don't chase them where they want," Prez said. "We cut them off." Mason blinked. "How?" Prez's gaze slid toward the back of the trailer park where the service road ran. Cracked asphalt, overgrown edges, no lights. The same route Mason had used to hide. "You know back ways," Prez said. "You live here. You know where the roads meet the yards without cameras, without streetlights." Mason's mind raced, mapping the town in his head. "There's a drainage cut behind the old tire shop. It runs under the highway to the river lot." Prez's eyes sharpened. "How far on foot?" 10 minutes, Mason said. "Maybe less." Prez nodded. "Good." Mason's stomach dropped. "On foot?" Prez looked toward the bikes. Half of them were being repositioned, riders readying, engines low. "We go loud with bikes on the main routes," Prez said. "Make them look at steel. But you and me, we go quiet. We get ahead." Mason's heart slammed. "Me and you?" Prez didn't smile. "You're the only one who can move through your own town without anyone noticing. And they don't know I'll go without my crew." Mason swallowed hard. Atlas stays guarded," Prez said. "They won't touch him again if they want to live." Mason wanted to believe that. The night had already proved people didn't care about living. Prez opened the truck door and reached in. He pulled out a dark rain jacket and tossed it to Mason. "Put that on," he said. "No bright clothes." Mason shoved his arms through it with shaking hands. Prez leaned in, his voice dropping to something colder. "If they hurt that woman because of you," Prez said, "you'll never forgive yourself." Mason's throat tightened. "I know." "So we don't let them," Prez finished. He turned to road captain and spoke without radios, using only eye contact and a few hand signs. Road captain's jaw tightened, then he nodded and motioned riders into two groups. One group went toward the road, engines rising. Prez grabbed Mason by the shoulder. "Move," he said. They ran. Not down the lit lanes, through the mud, behind trailers, through gaps Mason had used his whole life to stay invisible. Rain clawed at them, cold and heavy. Mason's lungs burned. Prez didn't slow. He moved like he'd done this before, like he understood back alleys the way he understood violence. They reached the tire shop, abandoned, windows busted, a sign hanging crooked. Behind it, the drainage cut yawned open, swollen with storm water rushing through the concrete channel like a river. Mason stared down into it. "If we go in there." "We go in," Prez said, already climbing down the slick slope. Mason followed, slipping once, catching himself with palms that stung against wet concrete. The tunnel mouth under the highway was black. Water surged in, knee-deep, cold enough to steal breath. Prez stepped into it without hesitation. Mason stepped in after him and gasped at the shock. They waded forward, water pushing hard against their legs, the roar of rain and runoff echoing like a living thing. Ahead, the tunnel narrowed. Darkness thickened. Mason's heart pounded. Then, faintly through the roar, he heard something else, a scream, muffled, female, and close enough that Mason felt it in his bones. Prez stopped, head tilting like a predator catching scent. Mason's breath came out in white fog. "That's her." Prez's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yeah." They moved faster, splashing quietly as two men could in rushing water. And then, up ahead, a dim light flickered, just a sliver, coming from a side opening in the tunnel. Voices, too, two of them, low, laughing, and in between them, a weak, muffled sob. Prez pressed a hand against Mason's chest, stopping him dead. "Listen," Prez whispered. "You see anything, you don't shout, you don't run, you wait for my signal." Mason nodded, throat tight. Prez leaned close, voice barely audible over the water. "If this goes wrong," he said, "they'll kill her first to punish you." Mason's stomach twisted into knots. Prez's eyes locked on the flickering light. Then he lifted two fingers. "Wait," and stepped toward the side opening. Prez moved like the tunnel belonged to him, one step, then another, feet sliding on slick concrete without losing balance. He kept his shoulders low, head angled, listening to the voices ahead the way a dog listens for a door opening. Mason stayed where he was, water shoving at his knees, hands clenched so hard his fingers hurt. The side opening was a cutout in the wall where runoff fed into the main channel. It was half hidden behind a dangling sheet of plastic and broken boards wedged there, old junk somebody had used to block the draft. Behind it, a dim lantern glow flickered, weak but enough, and the voices were closer now. Two men, laughing like the storm was entertainment. "Told you he'd come," one of them said. "You don't snatch a waitress and not get a response." The second voice, lower, amused. "He ain't just coming. He brought the kid too. That's the best part." Mason's blood ran cold. The kid. They meant him. A muffled sound. Tessa gagged, followed, and Mason's stomach twisted. It wasn't just fear in that sound. It was pain. Prez stopped at the edge of the opening. He didn't rush. He waited, watching their shadows dance on the wet concrete. Mason held his breath. Prez lifted one finger. "Stay." Without looking back, then eased through the plastic and boards. Mason couldn't see everything from where he stood, but he could see enough. A wider chamber beyond the cutout, where the tunnel expanded into a maintenance space. The floor was drier there, water running in thin streams. A lantern sat on an overturned bucket. Two men stood near a metal utility door, rusted, bolted, like it hadn't been used in years. And Tessa was on the ground, wrists bound behind her back, ankles taped. Her mouth was covered. Her hair was soaked and stuck to her face. Her eyes were open, wild and pleading. One of the men had tattoos on his hands, skull ring. The limp in his right leg was real when he shifted weight. Mason's heart tried to climb out of his throat. The same man from the trailer. The second man wore a hood and gloves. Bigger frame, less expressive, the kind of person hired to be quiet. He held a short crowbar like it was part of his arm. The skull ring man was talking, casual. "Harlan says the boy's with him, says he's scared enough to do something stupid. That's what we want. Stupid, loud, messy." Harlan. Mason's vision narrowed. The deputy wasn't just involved, he was a coordinator. Prez stood just inside the chamber's shadow. For a second, Mason thought the men would notice him. But they didn't. The lantern glare made them blind to the dark, and the storm noise kept their ears lazy. Skull Ring Man tapped his phone screen. "We got eyes on the diner still?" he asked. The hooded man nodded once. "Camera's up. Battery's good." Skull Ring Man smiled. "Good. Let Prez think he's outsmarting the storm. Meanwhile, we pull him where we want him." He crouched beside Tessa and grabbed her hair, yanking her face up. She made a gagged sound, tears mixing with rain. "You," he said softly, like he was sweet-talking a child. "You're going to do me a favor." Tessa shook her head violently. Skull Ring Man's smile widened. "You're going to tell Prez you saw Mason take the kid. You're going to say it real clear. Because if you don't—" He turned his head slightly, and the hooded man lifted the crowbar an inch, letting it hover near Tessa's ribs like a promise. Mason's stomach flipped. Prez shifted, barely. Just enough. Skull Ring Man's head snapped up. For half a second, everything paused. Then the man's eyes locked onto the dark, and he smiled. "Well," he said, voice warm with satisfaction, "look who crawled through the sewer." Prez stepped fully into the lantern light. The air changed. Even the hooded man straightened, grip tightening on the crowbar. Prez didn't look at them with rage. He looked at them like he was counting distances. "Let her go," Prez said. Skull Ring Man laughed. "You came without your boys." Prez's eyes didn't move. "Let her go." The man's limp shifted as he rose, rolling his shoulders like he was loosening up for a fight. "You know what I want," he said. "I want you to admit you ain't untouchable. I want you begging where nobody can see it." Prez took one step forward. Skull Ring Man's smile faded into something sharp. "Stop." Prez didn't. The hooded man moved, sliding sideways, trying to get an angle. Mason saw it from his position in the tunnel, saw the way the hooded man's body lined up with Prez's ribs like he was preparing to swing the crowbar into bone, and Mason's whole body reacted before his brain could stop it. He stepped forward. Water splashed. It wasn't loud, but in that tight chamber it might as well have been a gunshot. Skull Ring Man's eyes flicked past Prez, straight to Mason. There was a moment of pure, bright recognition. "There he is," the man said softly. "The delivery boy." Prez's head turned just slightly, eyes narrowing when he saw Mason had moved. His jaw tightened. Not anger, something else. "You disobeyed." Mason froze at the opening, half in water, half out, rain dripping off his hood. Skull Ring Man's gaze crawled over him. "You know what I like about poor kids?" he said. "They think doing one good thing makes them safe." Mason swallowed. His voice shook, but he forced it out. "Let her go. This doesn't have to—" Skull Ring Man interrupted with a laugh that carried no humor. "It already does." He nodded once to the hooded man. The hooded man lifted the crowbar, not toward Prez, toward Tessa. Prez's posture shifted instantly, tiny, lethal, and Skull Ring Man used that half-second to do something Mason didn't expect. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small black pouch. He tossed it into the water near Mason's feet. It hit with a slap, then started to fizz, white smoke spitting out fast. Mason's eyes widened. "No!" Smoke surged up, thick and choking, mixing with mist and tunnel air, turning everything into a blur. Tessa's muffled scream cut through. Prez moved, fast, straight toward the lantern, straight toward the men, but the hooded man swung the crowbar at the lantern itself. Metal hit glass. The lantern shattered and darkness slammed down like a door. In the black, Mason heard footsteps running, a wet scrape, someone dragging Tessa. Prez's voice snapped through the dark, furious. "Mason! Back!" Mason coughed, eyes burning. He tried to step backward, but his boot caught on something in the rushing water. He went down hard, shoulder slamming the concrete. The smoke stung his throat. He heard a motorcycle engine in the distance, impossible inside a tunnel, but real, growing louder, like there was an exit nearby. Then a new sound. Radio chatter, faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere close. "Harlan to unit! Move, move!" Mason's blood went ice. They still have comms. Prez had killed his own, but the enemy hadn't. A hand grabbed Mason's collar, yanked him up. Prez, eyes fierce even in darkness, hauled him to his feet. "We're late," Prez growled. Mason coughed, trying to see. "Tessa, we don't lose her," Prez snapped. He dragged Mason through the smoke deeper into the chamber toward the metal utility door. Mason blinked through tears and saw it now, fresh scrape marks on the floor leading straight to that door, like it had been used recently despite the rust. Prez slammed his shoulder into it. It didn't budge. He hit it again, harder. The bolt rattled. From the other side came a sound that made Mason's stomach drop. A laugh, close, calm. Skullring man's voice, muffled through metal. "You almost had it," he said, "but you're always one step behind when you bring civilians." Prez's hands clenched into fists. Mason's throat burned. "How do we get through?" Prez leaned close to the door, voice low and deadly. "You don't." He turned, grabbing Mason by the front of the rain jacket, eyes blazing. "You know another way out of these drains?" he demanded. Mason's mind raced, the town map flashing behind his eyes. There's a maintenance ladder up by the river lot. It comes out behind the old pumping station." Prez's gaze locked in. "How far?" 3 minutes if we run," Mason said, lungs on fire. Prez released him, already moving. "Then run." They splashed back into the main channel, water hammering their legs. Behind them, through smoke and darkness, came one last muffled sound. Tessa's sob choked off mid-breath, like a hand had covered her mouth. And then the radio, faint again, cutting through the tunnel roar. "Harlan says Prez is in the drains. Cut him off at the pumping station." Prez's head snapped toward the direction Mason had just named. His voice dropped, tight with realization. "They know," he said. And Mason understood with sick clarity. The trap wasn't just for Prez anymore. It was for him, too. They ran like the tunnel was chasing them. Water slapped Mason's thighs, stole his footing, tried to pull him backward. The storm above roared through cracks in the concrete like the world was breathing down their necks. Prez moved ahead without slowing, shoulders squared, eyes locked forward, as if the darkness was a hallway he'd walked 100 times. Mason's lungs burned. Every breath tasted like wet metal and smoke. Behind them, the chamber was gone, swallowed by distance and the thick, damp air. But Mason could still hear the echo of that laugh through the door, still hear the radio voice like a ghost in the concrete. "Harlan says Prez is in the drains. Cut him off at the pumping station." They weren't just chasing anymore. They were being guided, herded, like animals. Mason stumbled on a slick ridge of concrete and caught himself with a palm in the water. Pain shot up his wrist. Prez grabbed his sleeve and yanked him upright without breaking stride. "Focus," Prez growled. "I am," Mason rasped, though his brain was screaming. Ahead, the tunnel angled up slightly, the water thinning from knee-deep to shin-deep. Mason recognized it, barely, because the air changed, less heavy, less enclosed. A faint draft. "The ladder's coming," Mason said, voice shaking. Prez nodded once, not wasting breath. Then a sound rolled through the tunnel, distant but unmistakable. Not thunder, engines, more than one, above them. Mason's stomach dropped. "They're already there." Prez didn't answer. He didn't need to. The fact was in the sound. They rounded a bend and Mason saw the ladder. A rusted vertical climb bolted into the wall where the tunnel widened under the pumping station. Above it was a square maintenance hatch, metal, heavy, wet. And beside the ladder, something else. A thin wire stretched across the tunnel at chest height. Mason froze mid-step. "Stop!" Prez stopped instantly, eyes cutting to the wire. It was nearly invisible in the dim, but it shimmered when lightning flickered through a crack up top. A tripline, a trap. Mason's breath came out sharp. "They said it!" Prez lowered himself, inspecting without touching. He didn't look surprised. He looked irritated, like the enemy had confirmed what he already knew. "You said the ladder comes out behind the pumping station," Prez murmured. "Yeah," Mason said. "It's supposed to be quiet," Prez cut in. Mason swallowed the rest of the sentence. Prez stepped back, scanning the tunnel walls. The water was lower here. That meant movement was easier. That meant they'd planned this spot for control. Then Mason heard it, bootsteps splashing somewhere behind them, fast, multiple, not their people, not road captain, too close. Mason's eyes widened. "We're not alone." Prez grabbed Mason by the collar and pulled him against the wall into a recessed gap where an old pipe ran overhead. They pressed into shadow as footsteps approached. A flashlight beam swept through the tunnel, quick, searching. Two voices followed, low and confident. "They're close," one said. "Harlan says they took the drains," the other replied. "If we catch Prez down here, we don't need the boy alive." Mason's stomach turned to ice. The beam flicked over the tripline, careful. Whoever these men were, they knew it was there. They moved past it, stepping around it like it was normal furniture. Mason held his breath until his ribs ached. One of the men stopped near the ladder and looked up. He spoke into something. Earpiece, maybe. "Positioned," he said. "We got the hatch covered. If he climbs, he dies." A pause, then the man's voice softened, almost pleased. "What about the girl?" The answer came from the earpiece, faint but audible in the tunnel's echo. "Moving her now. River lot, same deal. Prez shows, she breathes. Prez doesn't, she floats." Mason felt nauseous. Prez's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it would break teeth. His hand, low by his thigh, made a small motion, 2 fingers, then a fist. A signal. Mason didn't know what it meant, but he understood it wasn't meant for him. Then the truth hit him with a cold punch. Prez had walked into this with only Mason. No radios, no phones, no backup. And the enemy had men on both sides. They were pinned. The men at the ladder shifted position. One stood near the wire, watching the tunnel behind them. The other hovered under the hatch, ready. They were waiting for movement, for panic, for a mistake. Mason's thoughts raced. If we go back, we run into the guys behind us. If we go forward, the ladder's covered. If we trigger the wire, we're done. Prez leaned close to Mason's ear, voice barely a breath. "You said there's a cut that feeds the river lot," he whispered. Mason swallowed. "Yeah, it branches earlier, before the chamber." Prez's eyes narrowed. "And you didn't mention another way up." Mason's throat tightened. There's an emergency outlet. It's not a ladder. It's a slope, under the old bridge. It usually stays flooded." Prez's gaze sharpened. "Can we move through it?" Mason hesitated. "In this storm? Maybe, but it's tight, and Then that's where we go," Prez whispered. Mason's mouth went dry. "But that leads right toward the river lot." Prez didn't blink. "Exactly." Mason stared at him, confused. "That's where they're taking Tessa." Prez's voice dropped, cold and precise. "They want me to show up late," he said, "so they can make it public, so they can make me choose in front of someone with a camera, so they can make a story out of it." Mason's stomach tightened. "A camera?" Prez nodded, eyes fixed on the 2 men guarding the ladder. "Same way they had eyes on the diner, same way they want her to lie." Mason's heart hammered. "So what do we do?" Prez leaned even closer. "We don't arrive the way they expect," he whispered. "We arrive from the river." A laugh echoed faintly through the tunnel. One of the guards was joking about something, relaxed because he believed the trap was perfect. Prez waited until the flashlight beam turned away. Then he moved, fast. He reached down into the water and grabbed a broken chunk of concrete, heavy, jagged. In one fluid motion, he hurled it down the tunnel behind the guards. It hit the water with a massive splash. Both men snapped their heads toward the sound. Flashlight swung. "Back there!" one shouted. As the beam and attention shifted, Prez grabbed Mason's sleeve and yanked him low under the pipe, sliding along the wall toward the side branch. Mason's heart slammed. He followed, crouched, boots barely lifting above the shallow water. They reached the branch opening, a narrow cut in the wall, half hidden by grime and old debris. It angled down and away, darker than the main tunnel. Prez shoved Mason into it first. "Go." Mason slid into the tight passage, shoulders scraping concrete. Cold water surged in immediately, rising again to his knees. He grimaced, but kept moving. Prez followed right behind him. The guards shouted again as they realized the splash was a trick. Footsteps pounded toward them. "Tunnel! They're moving!" A flashlight beam stabbed into the branch opening. Mason's breath caught. Prez slammed his palm against a loose slab of concrete Mason hadn't noticed. An old chunk wedged into the side like a makeshift barrier. It toppled into place with a wet crunch, partially blocking the opening. Not sealed, but enough to slow anyone trying to squeeze through. The flashlight beam jittered, trying to find them through the narrow gap. "Prez!" a voice yelled, furious. "You can't hide in there!" Prez didn't answer. He just pushed Mason forward. The branch narrowed further. Mason had to turn sideways to fit. His jacket dragged against wet concrete, water pressing at his hips. Ahead, the passage dipped, and water rose again, thigh-high, then waist-high. Mason gasped at the cold. Prez's hand stayed on his back, forcing him onward. Then the passage opened into a wider section beneath the old bridge. Mason could feel it. The echo changed. The air smelled different, more open, more river. A faint gray light filtered from somewhere above, through cracks in the bridge deck. And then Mason saw it. An upward slope of slick concrete leading to a grated outlet. Water poured over it like a waterfall. Outside, the river raged, swollen and violent, tossing debris like toys. Mason's throat tightened. "We can't." Prez grabbed the metal grate and tested it. It rattled. Old bolts held it in place. He looked at Mason. "You know how to get that off?" Prez asked. Mason stared at the bolts, hands shaking. "Not without tools." Prez's jaw clenched. He scanned the tunnel floor, then spotted a rusted length of rebar half buried in mud. He yanked it free and jammed it under the grate's edge. "Hold it," Prez said. Mason grabbed the rebar with him, both of them straining against the pressure of water and rust. The grate groaned. Bolts squealed. For a second, it felt like nothing would move. Then, one bolt snapped with a metallic crack. The grate shifted. Cold river air surged in like a slap. Prez pushed again, and the grate finally gave way enough to make a gap. Outside, rain and wind screamed. Mason looked through the opening and saw the river lot in the distance. Dark shapes, lights moving, vehicles clustered near the abandoned industrial yard. And he saw something else that made his blood freeze. A bright white light aimed at the lot like a portable floodlight, a camera setup. Someone was filming. Prez's eyes followed Mason's gaze. His voice dropped to a whisper so sharp it felt like it cut. "They're making a show," he said. Mason's throat closed. "Tessa," Prez nodded once. "Yeah," he whispered, "and they want you on camera too." Mason stared through the rain at the clustered lights, the shadows moving like actors hitting marks. A sudden fear hit him, new and brutal. "They're going to blame me," Mason said, voice cracking. "They're going to say I kidnapped the kid. They're going to—" Prez grabbed Mason's chin, forcing him to look away from the lot. "Listen to me," Prez said, low and absolute. "You don't panic. You don't talk to anybody but me, and you don't let them pull you into their script." Mason's breath shook. "What script?" Prez released him, eyes locked on the river lot. "The one where you die," he said. Then, without hesitation, Prez shoved himself through the grate opening into the storm-swollen river, grabbing the edge and pulling hard. He looked back once at Mason. "Now," he said. Mason swallowed the terror in his throat and crawled after him into the roaring rain. The river hit Mason like a living thing, not just cold, violent. It shoved at his chest, yanked at his legs, tried to pull him under the bridge where the current was strongest. Rain hammered his face so hard he could barely keep his eyes open. The smell of mud and oil and flooded earth filled his nose. Prez moved first, already waist-deep, one hand locked on the concrete edge, the other feeling for footing like he'd done this before. He didn't swim. He fought the water like it was a man. "Stay tight!" he shouted over the roar. Mason forced his body forward, fingers cramping around the slick concrete lip. The current grabbed his jeans and tried to spin him. Panic flared, hot, stupid, useless. Then Prez's hand clamped on Mason's forearm and yanked him closer. "Breathe," Prez snapped. "You're alive. Keep it that way." They edged along the concrete wall, moving downstream just enough to clear the outlet's direct spill. Mason's boots found submerged gravel, then lost it, then found it again. Each step felt like the river was negotiating whether it would let him keep his bones. Ahead, through sheets of rain, the river lot glowed with harsh artificial light. Portable floodlights washed the abandoned yard in white. Shadows moved like organized workers, too organized for a storm. Mason's teeth chattered. "They're really filming." Prez didn't look at him. His eyes stayed on the lot. "Yeah." They reached a half-submerged ramp that led up from the riverbank. Broken concrete, algae slick, debris caught against it. Prez climbed first, using the edge like a ladder. Mason followed, hands shaking, stomach twisting with the fear of slipping back into the current. They crawled up behind a wall of stacked rusted pipes, half hidden from the floodlights. From here, Mason could see the setup clearly. A camera on a tripod under a tarp. 2 men nearby holding extra batteries, something like a microphone boom. A cheap generator humming, spitting exhaust into the rain. This wasn't a random kidnapping. It was a production, and in the center of it, near an old shipping container, Tessa was on her knees, wrists bound behind her back. Somebody had ripped the tape from her mouth, but a hand stayed on her shoulder, keeping her in place. She was shaking so hard, Mason could see it even from this distance. Skull Ring Man stood behind her, one hand resting on her head like she was a pet. His limp was obvious in the way he planted his right foot, careful, controlled. Water ran off his face, but he didn't blink much. He looked excited. To his left stood the hooded man, crowbar gone now, replaced with a compact pistol kept low against his thigh like an accessory. And there, near the camera, Deputy Harlan. No jacket now, no "I'm trying to help" posture, just a wet uniform shirt under a rain shell, face set like a man who'd decided which side he belonged to and stopped pretending otherwise. Mason's breath left him. "That's him," Prez's jaw tightened. "I see him." Harlan spoke to someone near the tripod, gesturing like a director. Mason couldn't hear every word, but he saw the shape of it, the camera angle, the floodlight position, the line Tessa would be forced to say. Skull Ring Man turned his head, scanned the darkness beyond the lights like he could smell prey. Then he smiled and spoke, loud enough to carry. "Prez," he called, "you here yet?" No one answered, only rain. Skull Ring Man laughed softly. "I told you," he said, glancing toward Harlan. "He'd come from the river. He's predictable when he thinks he's being clever." Mason's stomach dropped. "How does he—" Prez didn't move. He didn't even blink, but his voice went quiet, lethal. "He's got somebody watching the drains, or he guessed right. Doesn't matter." Mason stared at the men under the lights and felt the trap tighten. Skull Ring Man grabbed Tessa by the hair and lifted her head toward the camera. "Tell them what you saw," he said. Tessa shook her head violently, tears streaking down her cheeks. Harlan stepped closer, crouched in front of her like he was comforting her. "Just say it," Harlan murmured, voice gentle in a way that made Mason sick. "Say the boy took the kid. Say he was paid. Then you go home." Tessa's eyes flicked toward the darkness, toward where Mason and Prez hid, as if she could sense them. Her lips trembled. Mason's throat closed. He wanted to stand up and scream, to rush them, to rip her free. Prez's hand pressed against Mason's chest, holding him down. "Not yet," Prez breathed. Skull Ring Man glanced toward the camera crew. "Rolling?" A man under the tarp nodded, fingers tapping the camera. Skull Ring Man turned back to Tessa, voice louder now, performance ready. "All right," he said. "We're doing this simple. You tell the truth, you walk. You lie, you drown." He nodded toward the river behind them. The hooded man grabbed Tessa under her arms and dragged her a few feet toward the water's edge. Her knees scraped concrete. She cried out, begging through choked breaths. Mason felt his vision blur with rage. Harlan stood and looked straight into the darkness, as if he was talking to it. "You hear me, Prez?" Harlan called. "This is what happens when you think your patch makes you God." Prez's eyes narrowed. Mason whispered, "He's doing it to get you to step out." Prez didn't answer. His gaze locked on Harlan like Harlan was the real target. Skull Ring Man lifted one hand, palm up, like inviting applause. "Bring him out," he said, speaking to the darkness. "Prez steps into the light and she lives. Prez hides and she becomes a lesson." Then he added, voice sweet, "And I want the kid too. Mason, the little hero. He comes out with Prez." Mason's stomach flipped. "He knows my name." Prez's voice dropped colder. "Yeah." Mason's heart hammered. "How?" Prez's eyes stayed on Harlan. "Because Harlan listened at the diner, heard everything. He knows you. He knows your mom. He knows where to find your school records, your file, your name. That's what cops do." Mason's throat burned. Under the tarp, the camera operator adjusted focus. Harlan raised his voice again. "We can end this right now. Come out. Hand over the boy. Hand over your patch." "And nobody else gets hurt," Tessa sobbed, shaking her head, pleading silently. The hooded man shoved her closer to the water. The river surged below like it was hungry. Mason couldn't take it. He shifted, about to rise. Prez grabbed the back of his jacket and yanked him down hard, breath hot with fury. "You pop up," Prez hissed, "and they shoot you first. That's their script." Mason's eyes burned. "Then what do we do?" Prez looked at the shipping container behind the camera setup. Its doors were cracked open, just a little. Inside, darkness. He spoke without taking his eyes off it. "That container. That's where they'll stash her if you give them what they want, or where they'll cut her if you don't." Mason swallowed. "How do you know?" Prez's gaze flicked to the generator cable running into it. "Power goes somewhere." Mason's stomach dropped again. Skull Ring Man clapped his hands once, loud. 30 seconds, he announced. Then we wash her away. Harlan checked his watch like he enjoyed pretending time belonged to him. Prez, Harlan called, you love your kid so much, show it. Come out and prove you're not a coward. Prez's expression didn't change, but Mason felt him make a decision. Felt it in the way his shoulders settled, in the way his breathing slowed. Prez leaned close to Mason's ear. You're going to do something for me, he whispered. Mason's heart slammed. What? Prez's eyes stayed on the floodlights. You're going to run. Mason stared. Run where? Prez nodded toward the camera tarp. To that rig. Mason's mouth went dry. That's suicide. Prez's voice was absolute. No, that's the only way to kill their story. Mason swallowed hard, shaking. I'll get shot. You won't if they still want you on camera, Prez said. They want you alive long enough to confess. Mason's chest heaved. Prez continued, low and fast. When I move. You hit the tarp, knock the tripod, tear the cable, anything. Make it chaos. I get to Tessa in the chaos. Mason's palms went slick with rain and fear. Harlan called again. 10 seconds! Skullring Man smiled, lifting his hand like a conductor. Prez's grip tightened on Mason's jacket. Listen, Prez whispered, voice like iron. If you don't do this, she dies, and then they'll come back for you anyway. Mason stared at Tessa's terrified face under the floodlight. He thought of his mother's wrists taped, the warm lantern in a blackout, the phone showing the diner like a live feed. Everything in the night had been planned, everything except him choosing to fight back. Mason nodded once. Prez released him, then murmured the final instruction. When I step into the light, Prez said, you run like you're trying to escape. Mason's breath shook. Okay. Skullring Man lifted his hand higher. 3. Harlan's eyes swept the darkness. 2. Prez's body shifted, subtle, controlled. 1. Prez stepped out from behind the pipes into the floodlight's edge, hands slightly raised, moving into the open like he was surrendering. And the instant every eye snapped to him, Mason exploded from cover, sprinting straight toward the camera tarp, rain and fear in his throat, the floodlight blinding his vision. Harlan shouted, "There!" And someone raised a gun. Mason ran like the ground was trying to kill him. The floodlight made everything too bright and too flat. No shadows to hide in, no depth to judge distance. Rain hit his eyes and turned the world into streaks. He could hear boots splashing behind him, men shouting, a generator chugging like it didn't care whose life it powered. "There!" Harlan screamed. A gun came up. Mason didn't think. He moved. He cut hard left at the last second, throwing his body into the tarp frame instead of straight at the camera. The metal pole snapped loose with a wet screech, and the tarp collapsed over him like a heavy curtain. A shot cracked. It didn't hit him. It hit the tripod. The camera jerked, spun, then slammed into the concrete with a crunch that sounded like bones. Mason kept moving under the tarp, hands clawing blindly. He found a thick cable, generator line, and ripped it with both hands until the connection tore loose. The floodlight stuttered, once, twice, then it died. Darkness rushed back in like a wave, swallowing the yard. In the sudden black, men cursed. Someone stumbled into Mason. A shoulder slammed his ribs. Mason dropped to one knee, gasping, then shoved up and kept crawling, trying to get out from under the tarp. Another shot fired, blind now. The bullet whined off metal somewhere near the container. Tessa screamed. Mason's heart punched his lungs. He twisted toward the sound, saw her silhouette near the river edge, still bound, still held. Then a new sound tore through the chaos, an engine revving hard, close, furious. A bike roared into the yard from the dark side, headlight off, only the red glow of its taillight catching rain. It cut between men like a knife. Road captain. He'd gotten here, and he didn't come alone. 2 more bikes followed, engines snarling, tires throwing water. Shadows in leather moved with purpose, not panic. Men scattered. Harlan shouted something. Orders, maybe. But his voice wasn't in charge anymore. It was just noise in the dark. Mason shoved free of the tarp, coughing, drenched, and for a moment he couldn't see anything. Then a lighter clicked. A small flame flared. Skullring Man had lit a cigarette in the middle of the storm like he was proving he could. The flame illuminated his grin. He stood beside Tessa, one hand tangled in her hair, the other holding his phone up like it was still recording, even though the camera was dead. "Cute," he called into the darkness. "You really think breaking the camera breaks the story?" Prez's voice came from the darkness, closer now, controlled and lethal. It breaks your leverage. Skullring Man turned his head, searching. Where are you, Atlas's daddy? Mason's skin prickled. Prez had moved while everyone watched Mason. He'd used the blackout exactly like he said. Harlan's voice snapped from somewhere near the container. Light him up! Light him up! A flashlight beam swung wildly, then another, then another. 3 beams stabbing through rain, bouncing off moving bodies. One beam caught Mason's face for half a second. Mason! Someone shouted. Mason flinched, tried to duck. A hand grabbed his hood and yanked him backward into darkness. Mason nearly swung. Then he heard the voice in his ear, rough and urgent. Shut up, Road Captain hissed. Stay low. Road Captain shoved Mason behind a stack of pallets, using his body to block sight lines. He was breathing hard, rain streaming off his beard. You okay? Road Captain asked. Mason nodded, chest tight. Tessa, I know, Road Captain snapped. Prez is on her. Across the yard, a beam caught movement, Prez's silhouette closing in low and fast, using junk piles and rusted equipment as cover. He was heading straight for Tessa and Skullring Man. Skullring Man saw it too. He jerked Tessa up by her bound arms and dragged her backward toward the river edge. Back! He shouted to his people. Back to the water. The hooded man moved with him, pistol up now, scanning for Prez. Harlan appeared near the container doors, flashlight in hand, face twisted with rage. This was supposed to be clean, he screamed, as if anyone cared. Then Harlan's light hit Prez's chest for a split second, and the hooded man fired. The shot punched through the rain. Mason's breath stopped. Prez didn't go down. He ducked behind a rusted barrel as the bullet sparked off metal. Another shot followed, closer. Road Captain swore and tried to move, but 2 rival men rushed in from the side, one swinging a pipe, the other trying to grab him. Road Captain fought like a machine, one elbow, then a headbutt, then a boot to the knee. The man with the pipe dropped with a scream. Mason stared, frozen. Move, Road Captain barked at him. Mason forced his legs to work. He crawled along the pallets, trying to get a clear line of sight on Tessa. Tessa was stumbling now, bound and half-dragged, water at her ankles, as Skullring Man pulled her toward the river. She tried to plant her feet. He yanked harder. Her knees hit the concrete. She cried out. Skullring Man leaned close to her ear and said something Mason couldn't hear, but he saw her body jolt like the words were a knife. Then the hooded man turned his pistol toward the darkness where Prez was hiding. Come out, the hooded man called, or she goes in. Harlan moved closer too, wet face gleaming under a flashlight beam, voice shaking with adrenaline. Do it! Harlan shouted. Put him down! Skullring Man laughed. See, even the deputy wants blood tonight. Mason's mind raced. The storm, the river, the bound woman, the guns, the bikes. And then Mason noticed something that didn't belong. Near the river edge, half hidden by a pile of scrap, sat a metal winch bolted into the concrete, old industrial equipment used once to haul containers or boats. Its cable ran toward the waterline, slack and dirty. A cable, a hook, a thing that could pull. Mason's hands trembled. He looked toward Road Captain, but Road Captain was locked up fighting 2 men at once now, boots and fists and curses in the rain. Prez was pinned behind cover by the pistol. Tessa was seconds from the water. And Mason was the only person close enough to touch that winch without being seen. He swallowed hard and slid out from behind the pallets, staying low. Rain masked his movement. Shouts masked his breathing. He crawled to the winch, fingers searching the mechanism. The handle was rusted but not seized. He gripped it, tested it. It moved, slow, heavy, but it moved. The cable ran out toward the river edge where Skullring Man had dragged Tessa. Mason followed the cable with his eyes. The hook at the end wasn't attached to her. It was attached to something else. An old ring anchored in the concrete just a few feet behind where Skullring Man stood, like someone had once secured cargo there. If Mason cranked the winch, it would pull that ring, and anything tied to it. Mason's breath caught. The ring was connected to a thick chain that ran under a sheet of scrap metal, like a makeshift platform, a platform that sat right behind Skullring Man and Tessa. Mason understood in a flash. If he pulled the chain tight, the scrap platform could shift, could slide, could yank legs out from under whoever was standing on it. Not guaranteed, not clean, but it was something. Mason looked toward the river. The current was vicious. If Tessa went inbound, she'd be gone. He tightened his grip on the winch handle. and started cranking. Metal groaned softly, almost lost under storm. The cable tightened. The chain clinked. Skullring Man didn't notice at first. Harlan didn't notice. The hooded man didn't notice. He was too busy aiming into darkness, waiting for Prez to show himself. Mason cranked faster, shoulders burning, palms slipping. The chain went taut. The scrap platform shifted a fraction, then another fraction. Skullring Man's boot slid unexpectedly. He glanced down, annoyed. And in that moment, Prez exploded from cover, sprinting straight at them through the rain. The hooded man fired, but his shot went wide because the platform jerked again under his feet. Skullring Man stumbled, losing balance. Tessa fell sideways, still bound, hitting the concrete hard. Mason cranked with everything he had. The platform lurched. Skullring Man went down on one knee, cursing. The hooded man staggered, caught himself, then swung the pistol toward Mason's direction, eyes narrowing like he'd finally sensed the thread being pulled. "Over there!" he shouted. Mason's blood turned to ice. He let go of the winch and ran. A shot cracked behind him. A bullet tore through the rain near his shoulder and slammed into metal with a scream. Mason dove behind a rusted drum, heart punching his ribs. And then, through the chaos, he heard Prez's voice, close, furious, alive. "Get her up!" Tessa's sob broke free, loud and real. Mason peeked out and saw Prez at her side, cutting at her bindings with something in his hand, while Road Captain's riders surged in, pushing rivals back. Skullring Man scrambled to his feet, eyes wild now, no longer amused. He backed toward the container, limping harder, shouting at Harlan. "Where's my exit?" Harlan's face twisted. "We don't have one. The bikes." Skullring Man grabbed Harlan by the collar, yanking him close. "You promised me control," he snarled. "You promised me cameras, confession, and a clean kill." Harlan's eyes were frantic. It went wrong. Skullring Man shoved him away like trash. Then his gaze snapped toward Mason's hiding spot. He saw Mason's eyes for a split second in the lightning flash. And he smiled again, small and vicious, because even in failure, he'd found something he wanted. Mason's stomach dropped, because Skullring Man didn't run. He lifted his phone, aimed it at Mason's face through the rain, and said softly, loud enough for Mason to hear across the yard, "Got you." Then the generator coughed back to life somewhere. Another unit, backup, floodlights flickering on again. And Mason realized the worst part. The camera might be broken. But the story was still recording. The floodlights flickered, sputtered, then locked into a steady, cruel white that made the rain look like falling glass. Mason squinted, half blind again. His breath came in ragged bursts. The rusted drum he hid behind vibrated as engines revved, and men shouted. Skullring Man stood near the container doors, phone held up like a weapon. Its screen glowed even in the floodlight, front camera pointed at Mason's face, catching every wet, terrified detail. "Got you," he'd said. Like capturing Mason mattered more than escaping. Prez was crouched over Tessa, knife hand moving fast, sawing through tape and zip ties. Tessa sobbed and shook, trying to hold herself together while the yard exploded around her. Road Captain's riders formed a rough wall, pushing rival men back from the center. Fights broke out in pockets, grunts, punches, boots slipping on wet concrete. Harlan, soaked and pale, scrambled backward from Skullring Man like he'd finally realized he'd signed up for a monster that didn't honor deals. Skullring Man's eyes tracked Mason with a calm hunger. He turned slightly toward the floodlight and spoke, projecting his voice like he was on stage. "Look at him," he called, pointing the phone toward Mason again. "Our hero, the poor kid who found the president's son." Mason's stomach twisted. He understood now. The recording wasn't for fun. It was for leverage. If they could pin a confession on Mason, the story could survive any failed ambush. Harlan barked, "Shut up and move, we need to go." Skullring Man cut him off without even looking. "We're not leaving without the ending." He gestured with the phone toward the container. The hooded man, pistol in hand, moved that way, staying low, scanning for Prez. He was bleeding from somewhere near his scalp, a dark line mixing with rain, but his hands stayed steady. Prez got Tessa's wrists free. "Can you run?" Prez asked her, voice low and sharp. Tessa nodded frantically, gagging on sobs. "Yes." Prez grabbed her under the arm and hauled her up. Road Captain stepped in immediately, putting his body between her and the gunfire. "Take her," Prez told him. Road Captain didn't ask questions. He pulled Tessa behind the line of bikes toward cover near a stack of pipes. Mason exhaled a shaky breath, relief punching through fear. Then the hooded man saw the movement and raised the pistol. He aimed not at Prez, at Tessa. Mason's blood turned to ice. "No!" The shot cracked, but it didn't hit her. Because Road Captain shoved her down and took the bullet in the shoulder instead, stumbling with a grunt that got swallowed by the storm. His rider surged, dragging him back. Tessa screamed. Prez's head snapped toward the shooter, and something in him detached, like the last thread of restraint snapped. He moved, not charging blindly, sliding through cover, closing distance with the hooded man in angles and bursts. A man built for violence doing violence like it was math. Skullring Man watched it, smiling, then lifted his phone higher, narrating. "That's it," he called. "Show the world who you are." The hooded man fired again at Prez. Prez ducked behind a metal pallet. Sparks flew. The bullet ricocheted with a shriek. Mason pressed his back to the drum, shaking. He could see the yard clearly now, could see how this was splitting into two battles. One battle for bodies, one battle for the story, and Skullring Man was fighting the second one harder than the first. Harlan wiped rain from his face, eyes darting, desperate. He looked like a man trying to outrun consequences. He saw Mason. His expression shifted. Not rage, calculation. Harlan pointed at Mason and shouted to the hooded man, "Get the boy! We need the boy!" Skullring Man's eyes gleamed. "Yes," he murmured, like he'd been waiting for Harlan to say it. The hooded man pivoted, pistol swinging toward Mason's drum. Mason's lungs seized. He dove away just as another shot punched into the metal, ringing like a bell. The drum jumped. Hot fragments bit Mason's cheek. Mason crawled, slipping in mud, trying to reach cover behind the pallets again. But floodlight made him a moving target. The hooded man advanced, careful, gun steady, boots slow. He wasn't rushing. He was hunting. Skullring Man followed a few steps behind, phone still up, filming. "Run!" Skullring Man called, voice amused. "That's what poor kids do best." Mason's hands found something cold in the mud, a length of chain. He yanked it up without thinking and threw it toward the shooter's feet. The hooded man stepped over it, didn't even flinch. Mason's heart slammed. Then a new sound cut through the yard, sharp and deep. A motorcycle horn, not random, a signal. Mason looked toward the entrance of the lot. More bikes were pouring in from the darkness, headlights low, engines heavy, a wave of leather and steel. Not 7, not 10, a lot. The club had arrived in force. The rivals hesitated. For the first time all night, uncertainty spread across their faces like frost. Road Captain, clutching his bleeding shoulder, barked through pain, "Lock it down!" Prez didn't look back. He kept moving toward the hooded man, closing in. Skullring Man's smile faltered as he realized the crowd was tilting against him. Harlan saw it too. Panic finally broke through his mask. "We're out!" Harlan snapped at Skullring Man. "We're out!" Skullring Man's eyes stayed on Mason, phone still recording. "Not yet." Harlan grabbed his arm. "Now!" Skullring Man turned slowly toward Harlan, and the warmth vanished from his face. "You're not in charge of me," he said softly. Harlan swallowed. "I'm trying to save your—" Skullring Man hit him, not a punch, an abrupt, vicious slap that sounded loud even through rain. Harlan staggered, eyes wide, humiliated and shocked. The hooded man's head flicked back, distracted for half a second. Prez used that half second. He surged out of cover and slammed into the hooded man with a shoulder that took the pistol arm offline. The gun fired once into the air, useless. Prez grabbed the hooded man's wrist and twisted. Bone popped. The pistol fell into the mud. The hooded man grunted, tried to swing with his free hand. Prez drove his elbow into the man's throat and dropped him hard. The hooded man hit the ground and didn't get back up. Mason's breath caught, stunned by the speed. But Skullring Man wasn't. He backed toward the shipping container, limping harder now, phone still up, still filming, still smiling like he'd planned for every outcome. He reached the container doors, yanked one open wider. Inside, a dim light glowed. Power from the generator cable, a cramped space. And there, Mason saw something that made his stomach drop through the concrete. A toddler car seat, empty, a small jacket on the floor, Atlas's toy motorcycle, another one, identical, a prop. Skullring Man had built a set to make it look like Atlas had been taken again, even if he hadn't. To make the club look weak, to make Prez look desperate. Prez saw it too. His eyes went dead flat. Skullring Man held up his phone, rain dripping off it. "You can kill me," he said, voice loud enough for everyone, for every arriving bike, for every shaking witness. "But you can't kill the video." He tilted the phone toward Prez like a dare. "The world's gonna see your boy's dad, the big bad president, lose control." Harlan, bleeding from the mouth where the slap split his lip, backed away into the rain, looking for an exit. Mason realized what Skullring Man was really doing. He wasn't trying to win the fight. He was trying to win the narrative. Prez stepped forward slowly, eyes locked on that phone. Skullring Man smiled wider. "Come on," he whispered. "Give them the ending." And in the harsh floodlight, with the storm screaming overhead, Prez lifted his hand, not to strike Skullring Man, to point straight at Harlan. "Take him," Prez said, voice calm as a grave. Every biker's head turned. Harlan froze. Mason stared, confused. Until he saw it. Harlan's pocket. A second phone, water-resistant case, screen still lit, a recording app running, a live upload bar crawling forward. Harlan wasn't just watching, he was streaming. He'd planned to put it out before the night ended. Confession, chaos, blame, whatever stuck. Road Captain's riders moved on Harlan instantly. He tried to run, slipped in mud, went down hard. Hands yanked him up like a doll. Harlan screamed, "You don't understand, he made me!" Skullring Man barked a laugh. "Say it louder, deputy. Let the world hear how brave you are." Prez's gaze stayed on Harlan. "He didn't make you," Prez said quietly. "You chose." Mason's chest burned. He stepped forward without thinking. "He tried to take Atlas. He tried to take me. Skullring Man's eyes snapped to Mason, bright and sharp. "There you are," he murmured, phone angling. And then Skullring Man did the one thing Mason didn't expect. He threw the phone. Not at Prez. At Mason. The phone spun through rain, glowing like a tiny comet. Mason flinched and caught it on instinct. The screen filled his hands with light. A live stream interface, comments scrolling, viewer count ticking up. And on the screen, Mason's own face, soaked and terrified, framed perfectly by floodlight. Skullring Man's voice cut through, triumphant. "Now," he said, "tell them what I told you to tell them." Mason's hands trembled around the phone. Everyone was watching. Club, rivals, Tessa sobbing behind cover, Harlan held upright, screaming excuses. And somewhere out there, people watching a live feed, ready to believe the first story they heard. Mason looked at Prez. Prez didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just held Mason's gaze like a promise. "Don't let them write you." Mason's throat tightened. He raised the phone slightly, staring into the front camera like it was an eye. And he made his choice. He started to speak, clear, loud, and not the script they wanted, just as a sharp click sounded behind him, close. Metal on metal, a gun being cocked. Mason's blood turned to ice. Because in the storm and chaos, someone had gotten behind him. The click behind Mason wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It cut through the rain and the shouting like a blade sliding out of a sheath. Mason froze with the phone still in his hands, the live stream still running, comments still racing up the screen. His own face stared back at him from the front camera, wide-eyed, shaking, trapped in a frame someone else had built. Skullring Man smiled like he'd finally reached the moment he wanted. "Go on," he whispered. "Say it." Mason didn't turn. He couldn't. Every nerve in his body screamed that if he moved wrong, the gun behind him would fire, and his story would end right here in the mud. Prez's eyes locked onto something just past Mason's shoulder. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Don't," Prez said. The man behind Mason chuckled softly. "Tell your boys to back off," the voice said, "or I drop the kid on camera." Mason recognized it immediately. Deputy Harlan. He'd slipped free in the chaos, long enough to get behind Mason with a sidearm and a perfect angle. Harlan's breath was hot near Mason's ear. "You're going to do exactly what he says," he hissed. "You're going to confess you kidnapped the toddler. You're going to say Prez paid you, and then maybe you walk away." Mason swallowed, throat burning. "You're live too," he said, voice rough, staring into the phone like it was the only safe direction. "Everyone's watching you threaten a kid." Harlan's gun pressed closer. "They'll believe what I tell them to believe," Harlan snapped. "People always do." Skullring Man laughed once, pleased. "That's my deputy." Tessa sobbed somewhere behind cover. Road captain's men held their line, but they couldn't shoot without hitting Mason. Nobody moved. Even the rain felt like it paused. Mason's hands trembled around the phone. The comment feed exploded. Little hearts, angry caps, laughing emojis, faceless strangers picking a side in a fight they couldn't smell or feel. Skullring Man raised his arm slightly, presenting Mason to the floodlights like a trophy. "All right, hero," he said. "Say it clean." Mason's mouth went dry. Then he did the one thing he hadn't done all night. He used the truth as a weapon. He lifted the phone higher and spoke directly into the camera, steady, loud enough that even the generator seemed to hear. "My name is Mason Reed," he said. "I found a toddler alone in the road during the blackout. Barefoot, wrist bruised. I carried him to safety." Skullring Man's smile tightened. Harlan's gun jerked, pressing harder. "Stop talking." Mason kept going, forcing the words out before fear could choke them. The man who tried to take him was Deputy Harlan. He arrived too fast in an unmarked SUV with a blue dashlight. He wasn't relieved. He was angry. Harlan hissed, "Shut your mouth." Mason turned his head a fraction, not enough to give Harlan a full view of his face, but enough to make the statement cut deeper. "And right now," Mason said, voice shaking but clear, "Deputy Harlan is behind me with a gun to my back, on camera, live, for everybody to see." For a single heartbeat, the yard stayed frozen. Then Harlan made a mistake. He panicked. He reached for the phone with his free hand, trying to snatch it to end the live feed. The motion shifted the gun away from Mason's spine for half a second. Half a second was all Prez needed. Prez moved like a door slamming. He crossed the distance in 2 strides and hit Harlan's gun arm with a brutal, precise strike. The gun flew from Harlan's hand and vanished into the mud. Before Harlan could even gasp, Prez grabbed him by the collar and drove him down face first. Harlan screamed, trying to scramble, trying to reach anything, his other phone, his badge, his excuses. Prez didn't let him. He hauled Harlan up just enough to make him face the floodlight, then shoved him back down again, keeping him pinned with one knee and one hand. Road Captain's riders surged in, surrounding them, a wall of wet leather and breathing anger. Skullring Man's smile disappeared. He backed toward the container, limping hard now, eyes flicking for exits that weren't there anymore. The rival men saw the tide shift and started to retreat, hands up, trying to become invisible. Prez didn't chase them, not yet. He looked at Mason first. "You all right?" he asked. Mason couldn't answer. He just nodded, shaking. Prez's gaze snapped back to Skullring Man. Skullring Man lifted his hands, palms out, like he was performing innocence. "Easy," he said. "We can talk." Prez's voice cut through him, flat and final. "You kidnapped a woman. You broke into a kid's home. You threatened my son. You tried to bury the truth with a video." Skullring Man's lips curled. "Truth doesn't matter. Perception does." Mason looked down at the phone in his hands. The live stream still ran. Comments still flew. And now the camera showed something different. Harlan pinned in the mud, screaming, "I didn't, he made me." Prez nodded once, as if that proved everything. "Perception," Prez repeated. Then he looked at Mason. "Flip the camera." Mason's fingers trembled as he tapped the screen. Rear camera now. The floodlight glare softened. The frame widened. It caught Skullring Man's face clearly. His tattoos, his ring, his limp. The container behind him with the staged toddler seat. And then Prez spoke loudly. For the stream, for the yard, for anyone who would replay it later. "This deputy tried to take my son," Prez said. "He coordinated with this man. He set traps. He streamed lies." Skullring Man's eyes narrowed. "You can say anything." Prez's gaze dropped to Harlan. "Then let's ask him." Harlan thrashed, sobbing now, face smeared with mud and rain. "I didn't mean," he choked. He said, Skullring Man snapped, "Shut up!" Road Captain's hand clamped over Harlan's mouth, not to silence truth, just to stop him from vomiting lies. Prez leaned closer to Skullring Man, voice low, but carried by the dead quiet attention. "You came here to make a confession," Prez said. "You got one. Just not the one you planned." Skullring Man's eyes flicked to the arriving bikes, the tightening ring around him, the river behind him with nowhere to run. He made one last move. He lunged for the shipping container, trying to slam the doors, trying to buy cover. But he didn't get it. A biker grabbed him from behind and yanked him back hard enough his bad leg buckled. He hit the ground on his side with a grunt, rain splashing up around his face. Skull Ring Man spat mud and laughed anyway. "You think this ends because you caught me?" Prez didn't smile. He stepped to the container and kicked it open wider. Inside, the staged set was obvious now. Car seat, spare toy bike, a cheap light rig, a printed sheet with a script outline on a clipboard, weighted down by a wrench. A script. An actual script. Mason's stomach turned. Prez pointed at it for the stream. This was always theater. Tessa, shaking behind Road Captain's men, stared into the container and let out a broken sound, half sob, half rage. Mason's fingers tightened around the phone. He aimed it at Harlan again. Harlan's eyes met the camera for the first time. Real fear, real regret, real consequences. Prez spoke to him softly, the way you speak to someone right before the last door closes. "You wanted the town to believe a poor kid did it," Prez said. "Because poor kids don't have lawyers. Because poor kids don't have power." He turned his head slightly toward Mason. "But this one walked my boy home in a storm." Mason's throat tightened. Prez stood and stepped away from Harlan, giving Road Captain's men room to haul him upright. "Call it in," Prez ordered. "State boys, internal, everybody. Let the footage go wherever it goes." Road Captain, pale from blood loss, nodded once. "Already done." Skull Ring Man's laugh died. For the first time, he looked uncertain, because the one thing he'd built the whole night around, control of the story, was gone. Mason lowered the phone slowly, hands shaking. The stream chat was still flying, but now it wasn't their narrative. It was evidence. Prez walked to Mason and took the phone gently, like he understood how heavy it felt. "You did good," Prez said. Mason's voice cracked. "They were going to kill her." Prez nodded once, eyes hard. "Yeah." Then, unexpectedly, Prez reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. Folded bills, thick. He offered them to Mason. Mason stared. "I can't take—" "You can," Prez said, "for your mom. Hospital, food, rent, whatever gets you out of that trailer." Mason swallowed, eyes burning. "I don't want to owe you." Prez held his gaze. "You don't." Mason hesitated, then took the money with shaking hands. Tessa stepped closer, wrapped in a rider's jacket. She looked at Mason like she couldn't believe he was still standing. "You saved me," she whispered. Mason shook his head weakly. "I just broke a camera." Tessa's eyes filled again. That was enough. Rain kept falling, but the yard felt different now, less like a trap, more like a scene after a storm when you realize the roof didn't collapse. Road Captain was being held upright, gritting his teeth as someone wrapped his shoulder. Harlan was dragged toward a truck, screaming, "You don't get to do this!" Skull Ring Man was hauled up next, limp worse now, face finally quiet. Prez watched them both go. Then he looked back at Mason one last time. "You want in?" Prez asked, not a joke. "You want protection, a place where no one can ever touch you again." Mason's heart pounded. He thought of Atlas, tiny hand, toy motorcycle, purple cheeks in the rain. He thought of his mother's taped wrists. He thought of how fast a story could kill you if you were poor enough, and he thought of what it would cost to live inside this world forever. Mason took a breath and shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "I want out." Prez studied him like he was seeing something rare. Then he nodded once. "Smart," he said. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. "Get your mom well. Finish school. Leave this town when you can." Mason's throat tightened. "Atlas." Prez's expression softened a fraction, almost invisible. "He'll be all right." Then he added, like a promise Mason didn't know how to carry, "And so will you." Mason stood in the rain, clutching the money, watching the trucks and bikes pull away with Harlan and the Skull Ring Man inside them. The floodlights finally clicked off. Darkness returned, natural this time. And somewhere far down the river, thunder rolled like the night itself was closing its mouth.